We need to talk about the One Piece, and you're not going to like it, anime autopsy here. And we need to have a conversation about the One Piece, because I am genuinely concerned that we as a community have built this weird collective headcanon shrine to a treasure that does not exist in the way you think it does. You talk about the One Piece as if it's some untouched, shrink-wrapped final reward waiting on a pedestal for Luffy, and listen to me, that is a problem we need to fix right now. In your head, the ending is simple. Luffy is the first person since Roger to reach Laugh Tale. He walks up to the big mysterious device, opens the chest, presses the button, whatever, and boom, history finally starts. The seas change for the first time. The world government gets flipped for the first time, as if everything before chapter 1100 was just a really long prologue politely waiting for this one moment to exist. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how most stories are structured. The author keeps the final toy in the box until the hero shows up. Except here's the thing. One Piece has been screaming at you for years that this is not the first run of the story. The Void Century is not just a lore gap. It is an entire endgame that already happened. The Ancient Kingdom already reached Laugh Tale. Joy Boy already stood in front of whatever the One Piece actually is. Someone already pushed the big forbidden button, and the result was so catastrophic that an entire century of history got deleted, and a global government was invented to sit on the reset switch. Meanwhile, I watch fans on Twitter argue for 200 reply threads about what the One Piece will do. Will it raise the sea levels? Will it drop the red line? Will it summon a giant Nika balloon that punches Imu into the sun? Endless flowcharts, power-scaling graphs, people drawing circles on maps like a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. And the entire time they're ignoring the mountain of foreshadowing that it already did something on that scale 800 years ago. And we are living in the patched, censored sequel. Roger literally tells us they were too early. Not unworthy, not underleveled. Too early. That is an intentional storytelling category. It means the mechanism has already been used once and is waiting for the world to hit the same conditions again. The Poneglyphs, the inherited will of D, Nika, the ancient weapons, all of it reads less like a treasure hunt and more like a user manual for a device that has a 2-use warranty. And I say this with love. I say this as someone who has spent an embarrassing amount of adult life reading SBS, interviews, rereading entire arcs just to yell at strangers on the internet about fictional pirate economics and ancient nukes. I need you to stop treating the One Piece as a pristine prize and start asking the scarier question. What happens when you turn on the thing that already broke the world once? Because in the rest of this video, I'm going to show you how Oda has been quietly telling us that's the real story we're in. Mo, you've been sold a fake mystery, and Oda told you so. Because here's the thing, when you separate the One Piece from the Void Century in your head, you are nerfing the story. You are taking a loaded, world-breaking mechanism and turning it into a shiny trophy at the end of a scavenger hunt. The core frustration for me is simple. Fans keep treating these as two different categories of mystery, when Oda has been screaming for 25 years that they're the same event, censored once and then replayed. History repeats. Inherited wills return. The Great War is coming back. He says this in text, in SBS, in interviews. And then a new chapter drops. We get 3 panels of Imu silhouetted on the empty throne, and the entire community collectively turns into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Whoa, a brand new threat. No, old threat, same cycle. Zunesha shows up, and the timeline goes, wow, mysterious elephant, wonder what its deal is. As if the man didn't literally brand the series with a D that passes through bloodlines and centuries. Ancient weapons get name-dropped, and everyone rushes to power-scale them, instead of asking the question the author has been foreshadowing since Alabasta. Who used these last time, and what did they turn on? This is not a sin. This is normal fandom behavior. But it does flatten what Oda is actually doing. When you over-mystify Oda, When you pretend he's improvising some one-time, never-before-seen cosmic event that will only happen when Luffy arrives, you erase his real flex. The real flex is that he already wrote this endgame once, 800 years ago. Joy Boy, the ancient weapons, the great cleansing, the kingdom with impossible technology, the rise of a global government to bury it all. That's not backstory, that's the original final saga of One Piece. I need you to sit with that. I need you to stop imagining the Void Century as a lore dump we get before the real climax, and start treating it as Season 1 that got banned. Joy Boy's voyage, the Poneglyph network, the first person who reached Laugh-Tale and actually activated whatever the One Piece is, that was the prototype run. Roger's crew literally tells us they were too early, which only makes sense if there is a mechanism that can be reused when the world hits the right configuration again. And Oda keeps staging the Straw Hats as a deliberate reenactment of that first voyage. Nika imagery, inherited will, tides and moons, sea levels, and giant ships sleeping underground. This isn't random world building, it's a reset button waiting to be pressed a second time. We need to stop asking, what is the treasure? And start asking, what does it do to the planet when you turn it on again? So here's my promise. For the next 2+ hours, I'm walking you through receipts, panels, SBS answers, maps, timelines. We're going to build the case that the One Piece is a reusable world mechanism, not a one-use MacGuffin, and that we are watching round 2 of a cycle that already broke the world once. And when you see how tightly this is all planned, you're never going to read a Void Century theory the same way again. What this monster of a video is actually doing. So, yeah, you saw the timestamp. You already made the terrible decision to click on a video that's basically a feature film about a cartoon pirate rock. Respect. But listen to me. If I'm going to hold you hostage for movie night length, I'm not doing it for a flimsy, vibes-only, what if the One Piece is friendship post. We're not doing horoscope theory. We're building a case. Here's the thing. The high-level thesis is very simple, and then horrifying once you sit with it. The One Piece is not a single chest of gold or a metaphorical hug. It's a world-scale mechanism, information plus device, that was already used during Joy Boy's era. It went off. It did something so big, it shattered an entire century of history and forced the creation of the world government as containment. Luffy is not heading toward a first-time event. He's heading toward a rematch. To get there without turning into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in every panel of the sky, we need method. So I'm stealing the framework from the Foreshadowing video and mutating it for this problem. Foreshadowing, retrofitting, and Prewriting. I need you to keep those 3 categories in your head because they're the filter for everything that follows. Foreshadowing is the intentional stuff. Roger saying they were too early at Laugh-Tale, the repeated inherited will speeches, the way Nika, tides, and the ancient weapons keep orbiting the same conceptual space. Retrofitting is when Oda looks back and says, oh, that old gag about Kinemon and dragons, that's Wano trauma now. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. And then Prewriting is the scary one. Joy Boy's apology to Fishman Island, the Poneglyph network, the very existence of the Void Century as a hole in the timeline. Those feel planned from day 0. What I'm going to do over this monster of a runtime is walk arc by arc, interview by interview, world-building detail by world-building detail, and classify every major hint about the Void Century and the One Piece into those 3 buckets. Skypiea's moon law, foreshadowing or retrofit, O'Hara's map of a giant ancient kingdom, probably Prewriting, Imu's great cleansing, and the obsession with erasing history. That's where the model either lives or dies. And I need you to understand the scope here, because this is not a what's inside the treasure guessing game. I'm not going to argue whether the One Piece is a hard drive, a weapon, or a giant Joy Boy TikTok. The real storytelling question is, what already happened 800 years ago when somebody used it? Why did Roger walk away instead of pulling the trigger again? And what condition is the world ticking toward right now? By the end, if this works, you should be able to open any new chapter see a void sentry crumb, and immediately tell, is this supporting the already used model? Is it contradicting it? Or is it clearly a retrofit patching a hole? You'll have a mental rubric for sorting future reveals without spiraling into conspiracy corkboard mode every Sunday. But to even start doing that, we need to answer one brutal question first. What does it actually mean for the One Piece to be a reusable world mechanism at all? Orpichi, if we don't define foreshadowing, this video is useless. So before we can talk about world mechanisms and Joy Boy running New Game Plus on reality, we need to do something extremely unsexy. We need to define a word the community throws around more than Zoro throws away compasses: foreshadowing. And listen to me, if we don't do this, this entire video collapses into the same soup of screenshots and red circles you already scroll past on Twitter. Here's the thing. Right now, a huge chunk of fans uses foreshadowing to mean a thing that happened twice. An image shows up in chapter 50 and then again in chapter 1050. Foreshadowing. A background extra has similar hair to a character who appears 10 years later. Foreshadowing. Oda accidentally draws a random moon in the sky and someone edits an L next to it. Must be foreshadowing. We've become that pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and then writes a 40-tweet thread about it. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal fan behavior. Spotting patterns is fun, and half of community discourse is basically, where's Waldo, but with trauma and ancient weapons. The problem is when every echo, coincidence, or retroactive explanation gets promoted to Oda planned this 20 years ago status. If everything is foreshadowing, then nothing is. You can't tell the difference between a bullet Oda loaded in 1997 and a dart he threw at the wall in 2015, and that difference matters a lot for this specific topic. Because the question, did the One Piece already get used 800 years ago, is really a question about authorial intent. Did Oda know, when he drew Roger laughing at Laugh Tale, that he was echoing Joy Boy's second run failure? Or did he just draw a cool pirate ending and only later decide, oh, that was a reenactment of the Void Century endgame? Without a strict definition, you can't even start to answer that. So I need you to suffer through one annoying textbook sentence. Foreshadowing, in the classical sense, is when an author intentionally plants information early in a narrative that will become significant later. The key word is intentionally. The setup is born from a decision that already exists in the author's head at the time of writing. Chekhov's gun is the clean example. You hang a gun on the wall in Act 1 because you have already decided someone will fire it in Act 3. That's foreshadowing. If you wrote a cozy living room scene, threw a gun in the background for vibes, forgot about it, and then 3 drafts later went, oh, I can use that for the climax. That payoff can still be great. But it is not foreshadowing, it's something else. And in a weekly monster like One Piece, there are a lot of those something elses. So, we're going to split the mess into 3 buckets. Foreshadowing, which we just nailed down. Retrofitting, where Oda smartly reuses old material for new meaning. And then a third, nastier category I'm calling Prewriting, where the ending exists before Chapter 1. And the story is basically being revealed out of order. Once we have those 3, we can finally ask, which parts of the Void Century, Joy Boy and the One Piece itself were truly foreshadowed, and which were stitched in later to support the already used model? The 3 categories that will break your One Piece brain. So here's how we're going to stay sane. We're not just going to scream foreshadowing every time Oda draws a round object on a page and hope it's the moon. We need to sort this mess into 3 categories: foreshadowing, retrofitting, and the cursed middle child I'm calling Prewriting. First category, foreshadowing in the strict, boring, grown-up sense. Foreshadowing is when an author intentionally plants information early because they already know the payoff and are aiming straight at it. Not, this might be useful someday. Not, maybe I'll turn this guy into a secret prince if the editor lets me. The ending exists in their head, the scene is on their outline, and the setup is a deliberate step on that path. Statement, restatement. Foreshadowing is intent. The author knows what that gun is, who will fire it, and roughly when. Laboon and Brook are the clean textbook example. Oda has said he planned them together. You don't draw a giant suicidal whale with a scar and a pirate flag, then randomly invent a skeleton musician 300 chapters later and go, wow, what a coincidence. That is planned writing. That is the gun on the mantelpiece, because you already wrote the duel. Second category, retrofitting. Retrofitting is when an author looks back at something they did earlier. An offhand line, a weird design choice, a throwaway gag, and decides to reinterpret or elevate it into a major plot element later. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long serials survive past year 5 without collapsing under their own law. You toss in a mysterious scar, or a random D initial, or a goofy mantra power in Skypiea, and only later do you go, oh, I can systematize that into hockey, that works. The original panel wasn't a binding contract. It was raw material. When it pays off, fans scream foreshadowing. But technically, it's a retrofit with good cleanup. Now listen to me, because here's the thing. Neither of those is big enough to explain One Piece's endgame. That's where pre-writing comes in. Pre-writing is when the author has already sketched the large-scale events, the timelines, the world mechanics years before Chapter 1. The Void Century. Joy Boy. The ancient weapons. The One Piece being a world-changing mechanism that can only be used when the seas, the moons, the political map are in a specific configuration. In pre-writing, you're not improvising the destination. You're revealing a pre-built structure in slow motion. The Straw Hats reaching Laugh Tale is the second run of a machine that was already activated 800 years ago. Oda doesn't need every micro detail locked from day one. He needs the scaffolding. The previous final saga, the Great Cleansing, the Ancient Kingdom's tech level, that's the skeleton. Individual scenes? Those can be massaged. So the rest of this video is basically a giant sorting exercise. I need you to put on your little pattern-seeking monkey hat, the one that sees Jesus in toast, and then calm down and ask, is this panel foreshadowing, retrofit, or pre-writing? We're going to grab every Joy Boy mention, every Laugh Tale reaction shot, every ancient weapon tease, shove them into one of these 3 buckets, and see what pattern actually emerges. And once we do that, we can finally answer the real question. Which clues prove the One Piece was already used, and which are just very pretty distractions? Foreshadowing 101, the gun on the mantelpiece, and the island under the sea. So, before we start throwing panels into buckets and declaring verdicts, we need to slow down and actually define the gun on the mantelpiece. Because if we get this wrong, the whole "was the One Piece already used" argument collapses. I need you to have one clean criterion in your head. Here's the thing. Foreshadowing only exists if the payoff already exists in the author's brain. Period. The setup is there because the payoff is already planned. If you could magically delete that future idea from the author's mind, the setup would vanish too. No payoff in the brain, no gun on the mantle, no "oh my god, he planned this from Chapter 1" tweet. Simple example. Chapter 1. Your protagonist coughs blood into a handkerchief. The scene doesn't advance the plot. No one comments on it. It's just there. But the author already knows that in Chapter 50, this character dies of an incurable illness. That cough is foreshadowing. It's not a vibe. It's not a coincidence. It's not the author discovering the illness 40 chapters later and going, oh hey, I can use that cough as a retroactive excuse. The illness death is already locked in. The cough exists to serve it. Now, if the author had no plan, wrote the cough as random flavor, and only in Chapter 49 decided, terminal disease might be spicy, that original cough was not foreshadowing. The author just retrofitted meaning onto an old detail. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long serials survive. But it is a different category. Translate that into One Piece terms and the picture sharpens. Very early, Oda brings up the Void Century. He introduces poneglyphs that literally cannot be read by almost anyone. He has Nico Robin's entire existence revolve around forbidden history. These are not casual world-building ornaments. These are the blood coughs of the setting. They scream, there is a hidden, already planned catastrophe sitting in the author's head, and you are only seeing the crumbs. And competent authors do this constantly on a small scale. A throwaway character quirk that later becomes a combat style. A childhood promise that quietly dictates every big decision. A running gag that flips into a trauma reveal. This is normal. This is fine. Oda is absolutely playing at that level and then stapling a 100-year conspiracy on top. So when fans in the community scream, he foreshadowed Nika in Chapter 1, or Joy Boy was planned from the Romance Dawn pilot, we need to pause. Is that a cough-then-illness situation, or are we just being a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast? Did that early panel exist because the endgame was already fixed, or are we blessing a retrofit as divine prophecy because it feels cooler? Listen to me. In the next sections, I'm going to argue that some of the most hyped Oda planned this from day one moments are actually retrofits or pre-writing fragments, not pure foreshadowing. And that's fine. The real horror show starts when we apply this strict definition to Joy Boy, the ancient weapons, and that island under the sea, and realize which gun has been on the mantelpiece since Chapter 1. Retrofitting. The dirty secret of long-running manga that isn't actually dirty. So before we start accusing Oda of being a time-traveling octopus with a whiteboard in every dimension, we need to talk about the dirty word in this community, retrofitting. Because if you don't understand this category, you're going to mislabel half of modern manga as 4D foreshadowing, and the other half as plot holes, and miss what's actually impressive. Here's the thing, retrofitting is not random. It's not, oops, I tripped and invented Joy Boy. Retrofitting is when an author takes something they wrote earlier, maybe a throwaway gag, a vague line, a background detail that existed for vibes, and later recontextualizes it, so it now carries a big intentional narrative weight. The panel didn't change. The meaning did. The author is essentially going back and telling you, no, that thing you skimmed, that was secretly important all along. Let me give you a neutral, non-void century no one has to fight in the comments example. A gag side character shows up in Chapter 20. They're there to eat food, scream, and get punted into the horizon. Readers love them. Fan mail, polls, cosplay, the whole thing. So the author brings them back again and again. And suddenly, 10 volumes later, that idiot is the secret prince of a fallen kingdom, the key to the main villain's plan, and their early nonsense lines are reread as tragic foreshadowing. Were those first scenes planned with that destiny in mind? Often no. But the author retrofits them, stitching new meaning onto old material. And this is not a sin. I need you to really hear that. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most serialized storytelling survives. Weekly manga is produced under brutal time pressure, with editors rotating in and out, reader surveys threatening cancellation, and long-term plans constantly being nudged, stretched, or detonated. If you tried to lock every character arc, every mystery, every payoff from Chapter 1 under those conditions, that's not genius planning. That's career suicide. Retrofitting is the pressure valve. It lets an author rescue cool fragments from their own past work and upgrade them into something central. And when it's done well, here's the uncomfortable part. On the page, it can feel indistinguishable from true foreshadowing. Same panel, same line, same, oh my god, he planned this reaction gif. The only real difference is what was actually in the author's head at the time of writing, which we can sometimes infer from interviews, drafts, and suspicious timing, but we almost never know with absolute certainty. Pattern interrupt. I'm not telling you this to ruin the magic. I'm telling you this because Oda uses all three categories, foreshadowing, retrofitting, and pre-writing, and if you mash them together, you miss how clever the engineering actually is. So when we get to Joy Boy, the D-Clan, Inherited Will, Rebellion, all that people carry the torch of history stuff. I'm going to argue that a lot of the early hints were broad thematic ideas that Oda later retrofitted into much sharper, void century-specific lore. The bones were there from day one. The skeleton got a name and a bounty poster later. And in the next section, we're going to start pulling specific Joy Boy receipts and sort them ruthlessly into their proper category. Prewriting. The Oda-only mode that makes One Piece feel planned. So here's where I'm going to invent a term, admit it's fake, and then demand you take it seriously anyway. I need you to understand prewriting. Not in the school worksheet sense. In the Oda has a secret Word document from 1996 that could vaporize the fandom sense. Prewriting is not an academic category. No professor is out here grading essays on their prewriting skill. I'm using it because the community's current vocabulary is garbage for what Oda is doing. We have foreshadowing. We have retcon. We have Oda is a genius. He planned this 20 years ago memes. None of those actually capture the way this author mapped out the Void Century and the One Piece endgame before Chapter 1 ever hit Weekly Shonen Jump. Here's the thing. When I say prewriting, I mean skeleton. I mean, Oda knows there was an ancient kingdom with absurd tech, a great war, Joy Boy's failure, a world-changing mechanism on Laugh Tale, and a world government cover-up. Those are bones. Those are fixed. But every island, every side gag, every jobber with a weird nose, that stuff is clay he can squish around the skeleton in real time. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is how you survive serialization without your brain melting out of your ears. Think about how this interacts with weekly publishing. Oda isn't waking up on a Tuesday deciding whether the One Piece is a weapon or a hard drive. That decision lives at the pre-writing level. What he can decide on a Tuesday is whether some random archaeologist in a one-off cover story will later be retconned into an Ohara survivor who knows about that weapon. The endpoint is non-negotiable. Laugh Tale reveal, Void Century truth, One Piece function. The root, very negotiable. Islands can be added, rearranged or inflated because the spine is already planned. The best analogy I've got is building a massive ship while you're already at sea. Pre-writing is the hull and the engine. You design the shape. You decide it's going from East Blue to Laugh Tale. You bolt in a core that says, this thing can flip the world when it's activated. That's done before launch. Serialization is everything that happens after. You're swapping furniture, hiring weird crew members, repainting the deck. Retrofitting and foreshadowing. Are you walking around mid-voyage going, oh, that empty room? That's been the navigation lab the whole time, obviously. This is fine. This is normal. And this is why we need pre-writing for the argument I'm about to make. When I say the One Piece was already used 800 years ago, I'm not pitching a late-game twist Oda cooked up during Wano because he got bored. I'm saying that at the skeleton level, in the original Void Century blueprint, the One Piece's prior activation is already baked in as the cause of the war, the Great Cleansing, and the world government's existence. If that's true, then all the Joy Boy stuff, all the too early Roger dialogue, all the inherited will speeches stop being cute coincidences and start reading as fragments of a pre-written second run. So in the next section, we're going to stress test that. We're going to walk through Joy Boy, Roger, and the ancient weapons and ask a very rude question. Are we in the original story, or are we in the reboot after somebody already pushed the button? Why perfect 30-year planning is a fan fiction. So when I say, are we in the original story or the reboot, I need you to understand what that actually means on the production side. Because there's this mythology in the community that Oda is some all-knowing sea god who sat down at 22, plotted out 1,200 chapters, every D, family tree, every poneglyph coordinate, every exact panel of Gear 5, and then just executed for 30 straight years. Listen to me. That's not how weekly manga works. That's not how human brains work. That's how you get a cyborg chained to a desk, not a dude drawing goofy rubber pirates. Here's the thing. The brutal math alone kills the perfect 30-year plan fantasy. You're doing 15 to 20 pages a week. That's pencils, inks, backgrounds, assistants, corrections. You've got storyboards, editorial meetings, last minute, hey, survey's dipped, can we punch this up? Conversations. You do that 48 to 50 weeks a year for decades, while your body is actively revolting, while your wrists, your back, your eyesight are all filing HR complaints. Oda has talked about sleeping 3 hours a night during peak years. He's had multiple health scares. He now has scheduled breaks, because if he doesn't, Shueisha is going to be wheeling him to the hospital in an IV drip shaped like Luffy. This is not a sin. This is not bad planning. This is normal for this industry, which is the problem. And in the middle of that, you're telling me he's holding a perfectly detailed, unchanging 30-year script in his head? Every Joy Boy beat, every Void Century flashback, the exact dialogue of Roger laughing on Laugh Tale, all planned from day one, with zero revision. No. If that were true, he's not an author. He's a hard drive. We know from his own comments that ideas change. He's admitted arcs ballooned. Characters got promoted from gag to major player. He said the series got longer than intended. There are SBS answers where he basically shrugs and goes, yeah, I ended up using that in a different way. That's retrofitting in real time. That's an author adapting. And then you've got external pressure. Shonen Jump is not a monastery. It's a ratings war. You live and die by reader surveys and volume sales. If the community cools on an arc, you compress. If the hype is insane, you extend. Marineford doesn't happen at that exact length on a stone tablet from 1997. Dressrosa doesn't sprawl that far because of a sacred prophecy. That's Jump going, hey, this is working. Don't you dare stop the bleeding yet. So if Oda had every D, reveal every poneglyph location, every mechanical detail of the One Piece locked and laminated from Chapter 1, while also juggling weekly deadlines, meetings, and his own organs trying to escape. He'd be a machine. A very rich machine. Permanently installed in a hospital. Which means we need to adjust the category we're putting this story in. Total omniscience is unrealistic, but total improv is also nonsense. What you actually get, especially over 25 plus years, is a hybrid. Early pre-writing for the big mysteries, true foreshadowing for the stuff he knows is coming, and then aggressive retrofitting where he raids his own back catalogue for cool toys. And once you accept that, the question shifts. If Oda is mixing pre-written endgame with on-the-fly adjustments, what does that do to the theory that the One Piece was already used 800 years ago? Because now we can start separating which parts of the Void Century read pre-written and which parts feel suspiciously patched in. How retrofitting actually feels. When you're reading, so here's where this stops being abstract craft talk and turns into something you actually feel in your skull while you're reading. Because you already know this sensation, you just haven't named it. A good retrofit hits you in 2 stages. First, you get the reveal on the page. Boom, new information. Then, half a second later, your brain sprints backwards through the series on its own. You remember an old panel, an offhand line, some weird background object, and you go, wait. Was that always the plan? That uncertainty is not a bug. That ambiguity is the point. You're suspended between Oda is a 4D chess god and did he just judo flip his own canon? And it feels great. Contrast that with the bad version, the cheap version. That's when a twist doesn't recontextualize earlier scenes, it bulldozes them. Suddenly a character had secret knowledge that would have solved 10 arcs ago. Suddenly a rule of the world you were explicitly told is just different now. You don't go, oh! You go, wait, then why didn't they just... And your brain starts doing tech support on the story instead of enjoying it. You feel cheated, not impressed. Listen to me. The difference is whether the new information can sit on top of the old chapters without snapping them. If the earlier scenes still read as coherent human behavior given what the author is now claiming, retrofit accepted. If everyone has to have been acting in cartoon nonsense for the twist to work, retrofit rejected. Here's the thing with One Piece. Oda is very good at cushioning his retrofits with pre-written skeletons. He litters the story with vague but heavy phrases. Will of D. Ancient weapons. The promised day. That man Roger was waiting for. These are structurally sound but content empty containers. He knows the category of thing they're pointing at, even if the exact flavor gets decided later. So when he finally decides, okay, this specific god of the sun is Nika, and this specific ancient ship is Noah, he can pour that meaning into an old container without it overflowing all over continuity. Let me give you a hypothetical to make this less theoretical and more, oh, I've literally felt that. Imagine in early Paradise we hear a vague line about an ancient ship that will carry the chosen to the surface. No name, no Fishman Island, just a spooky art concept. Years later we hit Fishman Island and bam, Noah. Giant migration arc, tied to Joy Boy, tied to sea level change. If Oda had already planned, there will be a migration arc involved in the endgame, but only later decided on the exact design, the Sea Kings, the placement under Fishman Island. That's the hybrid mode in action. Pre-written spine, retrofitted flesh. And I need you to understand, noticing this does not ruin the magic. This is not a sin. This is normal. In fact, once you start spotting where the seams are, you actually get more impressed because you see how rarely they burst. You see an author surfing 25 years of weekly deadlines, weaving new meaning into old panels without blowing up the timeline, which is exactly the headspace we need to be in when we start poking the void century and asking, okay, which parts of this were locked in before chapter 1, and which parts were stitched on once Oda realized the One Piece might have already been used? Naruto's Toby reveal. The perfect safe example. And before we start accusing Oda of time travel and 12-dimensional chess, I need you to walk with me over to Naruto for a second. Because the Toby reveal is the perfect safe playground for this argument. No One Piece wars here. Just us, Kishimoto, and a goofy man in a mask. Quick recap. Toby shows up as this clownish Akatsuki member. He's the guy doing comedy bits in a terrorist organization. Then the mask cracks, the tone flips, and suddenly he's Obito Uchiha, Kakashi's dead childhood friend, survivor of the rock incident, and secretly one of the main architects of the entire plot. Huge twist. People lost their minds. The community immediately went, he planned this from the start. Peak foreshadowing. And on the surface, it sounds airtight, right? Fans point to the hair silhouette being similar to Obito's. They point to the single Sharingan eye on the right side, the fact that his name is Toby, which you can shuffle into Obito. They point to the timing of Kakashi Gaiden dropping right after Toby's introduction. The way the camera obsessively lingers on Kakashi's eye scar whenever Toby is around, the age range lining up, it feels intentional. It feels planned. It feels like the author was winking at you the whole time. Except here's the thing. When you actually look at author-side evidence, the story gets messier fast. Kishimoto has said in interviews that Toby's identity went through multiple iterations. At different stages, Toby was going to be Madara for real, or a Madara shell, or some other Uchiha entirely. The production timelines show that Kakashi Gaiden was slotted in because the editor pushed for more Kakashi backstory, not because some 500-chapter master plan demanded it at a specific chapter number. You can see the seams in the writing where Toby's personality hard swerves from idiot to mastermind once the decision crystallizes. So what actually happened? Early Toby is a mask character in the purest sense. He's a flexible container, a walking placeholder that can be filled later with whatever identity best serves the story. Once Kishimoto committed to Obito, he went back, mentally, not literally redrawing panels, and retrofitted that earlier ambiguity. The hair becomes a hint. The single eye becomes a hint. The timing of Kakashi Gaiden becomes a hint. But that's not foreshadowing. That's retrofitting. The meaning was assigned after the fact. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal, serialized storytelling. You draft on the page, you leave yourself escape hatches. Then you close the ones you don't need and pretend the one you chose was always the only door. Sometimes it's seamless. Sometimes you can hear the drywall cracking. And if we can admit that with Naruto without the sky falling, we need to be just as honest with One Piece. Not every Oda is a genius. He planned this 20 years ago meme is real foreshadowing. Some of it is true pre-writing. Some of it is coincidence. Some of it is Toby-style retrofit. The problem is when we shove all three into the same category and worship it. Because once you separate those categories cleanly, you can start asking the scary question. When Oda hints that the One Piece might have already been used 800 years ago, which parts are pre-written pillars and which parts are him doing a very elegant Toby maneuver on us in real time? Emotional payoff versus technical category. So here's where the community always trips over its own feet. We feel a twist, and then we immediately start arguing about whether it was planned from day one, as if that's the thing that decides if it was good. I need you to separate those in your head. Emotional payoff is one category. Technical construction is another category. They are related, but they are not the same thing. You can have a twist that was meticulously pre-written and still lands flat. You can have a twist that was clearly retrofitted and still wreck you emotionally. The axis that matters to your brain in the moment is, does this reframe what I thought I knew in a way that hits my values for these characters and this story? Not. Did the author have a pristine corkboard in 1997 with red string to chapter 1100? Toby/Obito is the clean example. For some Naruto fans, that reveal hits hard because it detonates inside Kakashi's trauma. The graveyard scene, the guilt, the way those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum boomerangs back on him. That emotional payload is doing work regardless of whether Kishimoto had a fully intentional Obito plan when he first drew the goggles. The foreshadowing discourse is a separate problem, because listen to me, the question, did Kishimoto always know Toby was Obito, is a technical, behind-the-scenes question about writing. The question, did Obito being Toby make you re-evaluate Kakashi, Minato, and the entire war, is about resonance. Both are interesting, but they're different categories of analysis. Confusing them is how you end up calling something bad writing, when what you actually mean is, I can see the retrofit seams. In long-running series, coherence and resonance are the real gods. Does the twist feel thematically consistent? Does it honor what the story has been telling you about its world, its cycles, its characters? If a reveal about the ancient kingdom, or Joy Boy, or the One Piece itself snaps into place with inherited will, with the tides and moons and sea levels constantly being mentioned, that's doing its job even if the exact wording of Nika was penciled in later. So when I say, for example, that Oda probably had an old sun god, or liberator archetype in his notes, and only later retrofitted the specific Nika branding and Gear 5 cartoon physics onto it, that doesn't make it cheap. This is not a sin. This is normal. The question is, does Luffy as Nika feel like the culmination of 20 years of freedom rhetoric, slave rebellions, and Sky Island sun motifs? If yes, then the emotional payoff is earned regardless of whether the exact name was planned, which is how we're going to treat the One Piece itself. We're going to be ruthless about technical categorization, pre-writing versus foreshadowing versus retrofit, but generous about craft. We need to be able to say, Oda probably decided the One Piece was a reusable mechanism during or after Skypiea, and in the same breath say, and the way he's tying that into Joy Boy, the ancient weapons, and Roger being too early, is insanely good storytelling. Because once you accept that, you can stare down the really uncomfortable possibility. If the emotional payoff still works, what happens when the text starts implying the One Piece has already been used once and might be designed to be used again? Okay, back to pirates. Oda's pre-writing on display. So let's zoom back in on pirates before we all spiral into conspiracy board territory. Because if I'm going to tell you the One Piece was already used, I need you to see that Oda is absolutely the kind of author who would pre-write that bombshell 20 years before dropping it. Here's the thing. We don't have to guess. We have receipts. We have early sketches of the Shichibukai and the Yonko in databooks from eras where those words hadn't even appeared in the manga yet. You can flip through those rough designs and see Mihawk, Crocodile, Doflamingo, Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido, all categorized long before Marineford or Whole Cake were even on the release schedule. That is not "I'll figure it out later" energy. That is "the board is already drawn, I'm just revealing squares" energy. Same with the arcs. Oda has shown outlines where Alabasta, Skypiea, Water 7, Thriller Bark, Sabaody, Fishman Island, Wano, all the big structural pillars, are sitting there in a rough roadmap before we ever meet Zoro. The names shift, the order flexes, but the skeleton? The skeleton is locked. This is pre-writing in the purest sense. The man knows his endgame and is just walking us through the tour. Now, zoom in on the Void Century, because this is where the already used thesis stops sounding insane. Poneglyphs show up in Alabasta. Robin's backstory in Ohara is early Grand Line. Nico Robin is literally introduced as a walking Void Century exposition bomb. The idea that there is a 100-year hole in history, an ancient kingdom that opposed the ancestors of the world government, and a network of indestructible stones preserving forbidden knowledge is not a late New World twist. It's baked in. Notice the pattern. We don't hear the word Joy Boy in Chapter 1. We don't see Imu's shadowy little gardening hobby until way later. This is fine. This is normal. Pre-writing doesn't mean every proper noun is locked from day one. It means the structural idea is. And the structural idea that something catastrophic and world-changing happened 800 years ago, and that the current political order is built on burying it, is present and consistent from Alabasta forward. So when fans say, maybe the Void Century stuff is Oda retrofitting new meaning onto old pirate adventures, I need you to look at how obsessive the world government's censorship is from the moment it appears. Ohara, Robin's bounty, the criminalization of archaeology, the Gorosei panicking over a single scholar reading a stone. That's not a casual theme. That's a thesis statement. Pattern interrupt. What if the Mystery Century isn't the prequel to One Piece's story, but the first season the world tried to cancel? Once you accept that the core premise, something was used 800 years ago that the world government is terrified of seeing again, is pre-written, not patched in, the next step is brutal. Because when we start mapping those early pillars onto Joy Boy, ancient weapons, Laugh Tale, and Roger being too early, the shape that appears on the wall looks suspiciously like this. The One Piece was already used once, and it's designed to be used again. And the story has been daring you to notice that from the moment Robin read her first stone. The Ancient Kingdom. The first people to beat One Piece. So if the silhouette on the wall is "the One Piece was already used," then the next obvious question is, by who? And this is where the story starts screaming at you in 72-point font about a group we keep treating as a lore backdrop instead of the original final boss. The Ancient Kingdom is not just some country that lost a war. Canonically, what do we actually know? They had technology so advanced, Vegapunk is basically doing archaeology. They stood opposed to a coalition of 20 kingdoms. They were erased so thoroughly that simply researching them gets an island buster called off the map. And they're directly tied to the Poneglyphs, the one information system the world government cannot destroy. That's not a random failed state. That's the profile of someone who already won once. Here's the thing. If you were an author trying to quietly tell you, hey, there was a previous endgame, this is exactly the category of clues you'd plant. Ultra-advanced civilization? Check. A united enemy bloc that has to rewrite history to justify its existence? Check. A forbidden language and indestructible records scattered through the world? That's not just world-building flavor. That's the residue of a completed story. We need to talk about those stones. The road Poneglyph system is not natural geography. It's engineered narrative. 4 specific stones, in 4 specific locations, that when combined point to one specific island. Only if you inherit this exact chain of knowledge do you reach Laugh Tale. Someone had to plan that. Someone had to decide, intentionally. The only people allowed to see the ending are the ones who chase our footsteps across the world. That smells a lot less like the world government and a lot more like the people the government is terrified of. So I need you to consider the boring, obvious explanation the community keeps dancing around because we're all pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. The ancient kingdom reached Laugh-Tale. They made contact with whatever the One Piece actually is. Weapon, device, information package. Probably some cursed combo meal of all three. And they used it. That use is what escalated into the Great War the Poneglyphs describe. The war so catastrophic that the only winning move for the victors was to nuke an entire century of context. In that frame, the One Piece becomes their trump card, their world-reshaping mechanism. Not a treasure chest. A button. Push it. And sea levels. Ancient weapons. The very structure of nations become variables on a control panel. This is not a sin in storytelling terms. This is the planned payoff of Oda's Prewriting. You don't invent that 20 years in. You build toward it. And suddenly the Void Sentry stops being a quirky prequel mystery. It becomes a case file. It's the record, deliberately fragmented, violently censored, of what happens when someone activates the One Piece before the world is ready to absorb the consequences. Which, conveniently, is exactly the situation we're hurtling toward again. Joy Boy, the original Pirate King. Who failed? So, if the Void Sentry is the case file of a failed activation, then we need to talk about the guy whose fingerprints are all over the crime scene, Joy Boy, because the story does not treat Joy Boy as some random lore NPC. The story frames him as the previous main character, the first run of the final saga, the original Luffy that didn't stick the landing. Listen to me, the clues are not subtle. You have the apology Poneglyph at Fishman Island, where Joy Boy writes this bizarre, heartfelt, "Sorry, I couldn't keep my promise," to an entire people. You have Zunesha, a continent-sized elephant, wandering the seas for 800 years on a punishment march, instantly recognizing Momo's voice and responding to the return of Joy Boy's will. You have the Noah, a colossal ark built for a mass movement of fishmen. And you have a literal prophecy on Fishman Island that Joy Boy will return and complete what he started. That's not a background king. That's a failed protagonist whose plotline got hard reset. Here's the thing, the apology. Poneglyph is not sorry I missed your birthday party. Joy Boy promised something structural to Fishman Island. Migration to the surface, a world where they could live under the sun without fear. That immediately drags in sea levels, ancient weapons, and whatever mechanism can physically reconfigure the planet. That's One Piece territory. So when he says, "I couldn't do it," you should hear, "I tried to pull the trigger on the same system Luffy is walking toward right now, and it broke." Either it backfired, or it was forcibly interrupted. And when you line that up with the 20 kingdoms uniting, the Great Cleansing, and an entire century of history being deleted, the timing is screaming at you. Joy Boy's failure and the birth of the world government are not two separate plot threads. They're cause and effect. The first activation attempt of the One Piece is the inciting incident that makes the 20 kingdoms go, "Absolutely not. Shut this down. Erase everything. Bury the gun." I need you to notice how Oda keeps mirroring Joy Boy and Luffy in ways that are too precise to be accident. The Nika fruit, the drums of liberation. Roger reaching Laugh-Tale, hearing the true story, and laughing because he realizes he was too early to rerun Joy Boy's plan. This is not a sin in writing terms. This is pre-writing. The author decided ages ago that the current journey is a reenactment of a previous, failed voyage. So if Joy Boy already reached the end, already touched the system we call the One Piece, and either used it or almost used it, what does that imply about what Luffy is about to repeat? Is he walking into the same trap, the same moral dilemma, the same world state problem that made Joy Boy write an apology instead of a victory speech? Because if history really repeats, then the question isn't, will Luffy succeed? The question is what has changed in 800 years that might finally let the gunfire clean. And that's where the ancient weapons, the sea, and a very petty God King start to matter. Roger's laugh. The man who saw the first ending. And this is where Goldie Roger walks on stage and ruins the comforting headcanon that no one's done this before, because someone has. He has. He literally speedruns Joy Boy's route, and then refuses to press the final button. We know the broad outline, but I need you to actually sit with it. Roger gets the final road poneglyph from Big Mom and Kaido's turf, races the clock with his incurable illness, hits Fishman Island, hears about Joy Boy's apology, and then with Odin reading, they sail to the last island. They find the Rio poneglyph, the void century, the ancient weapons, the truth about the world. And what happens? The future pirate king and his crew just burst out laughing. Grown men, world-shaking monsters, ugly crying and wheezing on the floor. Now, the community has turned that into ha-ha. It was a gag treasure. But here's the thing. Oda has gone out of his way to say the One Piece is not that. It's real. It's tangible. So why the hysterics? Because that laugh is not "this is a prank." That laugh is, "oh my god, someone already rolled credits." It's the sound you make when you realize you've been treating this grand epic as a race to be first, and the author quietly reveals you're in a sequel. And then you get the key line. Roger's crew leaves Laughtail and says, straight up, "we were too early." Not "we were too weak," not "we couldn't find it." Too early. That phrasing drops this whole situation into a different category of storytelling. It implies the One Piece is not a door you can open whenever you feel brave enough. It's a mechanism that only works when the world hits a specific configuration. Ancient weapons awake, tides and moons aligned, global consciousness primed. Roger saw the instruction manual. Listen to me. If Roger could not use it, the story would say that. Instead, what we see is a man who understands what happened 800 years ago and intentionally chooses not to rerun the program under the same broken conditions. This is not a sin. This is not cowardice. This is, from a writing perspective, the most responsible thing a doomed protagonist can do. He walks away from the switch and decides to create an era crazy enough, chaotic enough, that someone else might actually fix the underlying problem instead of speedrunning another void century. Pattern interrupt. Roger's big move is not finding the treasure, it's dying. He turns his execution into a global call to action. He weaponizes his own legend to flood the seas with pirates, revolutionaries, and maniacs until the world hits that required state. Roger becomes the bridge character Oda planned from Chapter 1. The man who saw the ruins of Endgame number 1 and framed the entire age of piracy as pre-writing for Endgame number 2. And that's why Luffy's laugh, Luffy's fruit, and Luffy's timing matter in a way Roger's never could. Because if Roger is the man who watched the first ending, Luffy is the one who's actually allowed to change it. Inherited Will, the world's save file from 800 years ago. So if Luffy is the one who gets to change the ending, we need to ask a very basic, very cursed question. What actually survives from ending number 1? What made it out of that first run of the game when the world government hit new file and tried to pretend nothing happened? Here's the thing. One Piece has already given you the answer in 100 different flavors. It just never stamped a label on it. In story, that answer is inherited will. The idea that desires, dreams, and specific goals don't die with a person. They rat around the corpse and reappear in the next generation. The D-Clan, Roger, Luffy, even Otohime and Shirahoshi. The story keeps hammering this. People die, but their "I want this world to be X" does not. And this is not a sin. This is not lazy shonen optimism where belief magically teleports across centuries. It's a very intentional narrative mechanism. Foreshadowing with a pulse. When Whitebeard screams that someone will inherit Roger's will, that D will one day challenge the world, that's not metaphor. That's the author telling you the real continuity in this story is not the timeline. It's the save data. Listen to me. Inherited will is a save file. Joy Boy played through the Void Century endgame, reached the final dungeon, used the One Piece, and then the console got kicked across the room. The world crashed. The government tried to delete the game, wipe the memory card, burn the instruction manual. But a fragment of that data survived. It's sitting there on the title screen as continue, and every few hundred years, someone with a D in their name hits A. Roger is the most blatant example. He gets to Laugh Tale, watches the cutscene for ending number 1, and realizes, oh, this isn't Prophecy, this is a rerun. He literally says he was too early. Structurally, what's happening is simple. Joy Boy's will to Roger's will to Luffy's will. And the Poneglyphs. Those are the literal external hard drives from the ancient kingdom. Red blocks of indestructible memory, scattered so the world can't accidentally format them. So when we talk about the One Piece as a mechanism that needs the world in a specific state, this is where inherited will stop being vibes and becomes engineering. The treasure can't fire if the global conditions are wrong. The seas, the nations, the ancient weapons, the D scattered across bloodlines, all of that is prereqs. Inherited will is how the story guarantees multiple attempts until someone finally clears the route with all flags triggered. And if you zoom out, you start seeing the really uncomfortable foreshadowing. Poseidon, Pluton, Uranus stop reading as random superweapons and start reading as tools in a multi-step process. Joy Boy already ran once. Poseidon to move the seas. Pluton to reshape or erase borders. Uranus to do something so terrifying Imu is still hoarding it. The first run failed or half succeeded. This is normal. This is fine. Speedrunners reset all the time. Which is why, in the next section, we need to talk about those weapons as system utilities rather than nukes, and what it means if the world is already halfway through the same script. The ancient weapons, tools of a failed world migration. So when the story keeps calling them ancient weapons, I need you to hear the air quotes, because if we actually line up what we know, they behave way more like tools in a migration toolkit than 3 random super nukes the author sprinkled in for spice. Here's the thing. Poseidon is not a laser cannon. Poseidon is Shirahoshi, a crying 12-year-old who can command sea kings the size of skyscrapers. That's not a battlefield gimmick. That's global logistics. That's tugboats for continents. Pluton is framed as this terrifying warship, a ship that can wipe out an island with a single shot. Sure, cool, scary, but a ship that big, with that much power, screams infrastructure. And Uranus. Every hint we get pushes it toward the sky. A thing Imu uses to snipe islands from orbit. A weather or atmosphere manipulator. A button that rewrites the map without ever touching the ground. You see the category problem, right? One controls the sea's living engines. One reshapes land and coastlines. One probably messes with the sky, climate, or sea level. That's not a rock, paper, scissors of war. That's a 3-part operating system for moving a world. Now plug Fishman Island into that. We have a literal prophecy about a promised day when the Noah will be used. We have Joy Boy's apology carved into stone because he failed to keep a promise to the fishmen. And we have a massive ark sitting under the sea, too big for any normal migration, explicitly tied to Poseidon. This is not subtle foreshadowing. This is a giant neon sign that says, at some point, someone planned to evacuate a ridiculous number of people with sea kings towing a space cruise ship-sized ark. Poseidon plus Noah equals mass transport. Mass transport to where? To a world that no longer has the red line in the way, to a world where the seas are unified, which is exactly where Pluton comes in. If Pluton's only job was explode island, you don't need blueprints hidden in Water 7 and a whole shipwright bloodline guarding the design. You just build the one gun and call it a day. But if Pluton's real function is to tear down the red line, punch canals through continents, or literally recarve the sea routes, then suddenly it's not just a weapon. It's a civil engineering nightmare for the world government because it erases the very borders their power is built on. And Uranus, sitting up there in Imu's pocket, becomes the failsafe. The climate switch, the tool that raises or lowers sea levels, drowns old coasts, reveals new ones, and finishes the migration script Joy Boy started. Poseidon to move the people, Pluton to break the walls, Uranus to reset the environment. Put together, they're not the prize. They're the arms and legs of the real mechanism. Joy Boy had access to this system. Joy Boy tried to run the program. The void century is what you call it, when a world-scale migration attempt turns into a war, and the winners spend 800 years pretending the patch notes never existed, which raises the uncomfortable question we need to sit with in the next section. If the One Piece is the command key that runs all of this, what happens if Luffy presses it on a world that's only half ready? The Great Cleansing, when the world government hit undo. So when I say, what happens if Luffy presses it on a half-ready world, I need you to remember, we've already seen the world government's answer to that. Their answer is, you don't let the program run. You unplug the whole computer, you erase the hard drive and then pretend computers were a myth. That's what the modern Great Cleansing is. Imu pointing a finger at Lulusia, the Gorosei whispering about erasure, and then a god-tier beam drops from the sky and the island doesn't just explode, it vanishes. No wreckage, no tsunami, no lingering debris field. Cartographers have to draw negative space. Narratively, that's not just a weapon, that's a delete key. And here's the thing. You don't invent that tool just to bully one random kingdom that annoyed Sabo on a Tuesday. The scale and precision of that blast screams ancient weapon or something in the same category. Fans already tag it as Uranus because it's atmospheric, it's global, it's clean. It behaves less like a cannon and more like a system command. Remove island ID number 00423 from the map, which immediately boomerangs us back to the Void Century. Because once you've seen Lulusia get Thanos snapped, Ohara suddenly looks less like a standalone tragedy and more like a budget version of the same protocol. When they can't or won't fire the sky laser, they fall back on buster calls, assassinations, and burning libraries. Physical destruction when necessary, informational destruction always. The original Great Cleansing was that philosophy at full power. Not just killing people, but systematically purging history, poneglyphs, and any trace of what the ancient kingdom actually tried to do. Listen to me, that is containment behavior. That is not we won a war and wrote the history books. That is, someone ran a world-scale program 800 years ago, and now every time the code even starts to recompile, we nuke the server. So I want you to reframe Imu and the Gorosei as janitors. Not masterminds in the fun, mustache-twirling sense. Custodians of a broken operating system they did not build. They inherited the tools Joy Boy's era used, whether that's Uranus, some satellite network, or a more abstract world-level mechanism, and their entire job is to deploy those tools just enough to keep the post-war status quo frozen. Not progress, not evolution. Stasis, pattern interrupt. What if the ancient kingdom used the same infrastructure, but for the opposite purpose? Instead of erasing islands, they raised them. Instead of deleting routes, they opened them. Same machine, different user, different command. Which brings us back to the One Piece as the master command key. If its prior activation forced the creation of the world government as a containment response, then the real endgame question isn't, what is the treasure? It's, what happens when someone runs that command again on a world that's been artificially paused for 8 centuries? Do you get liberation? Or a catastrophic system reboot? We need to sit with that before we start cheering for Luffy to hit enter in the final act. Poneglyphs. The breadcrumb trail from a previous run. So if Luffy hitting enter might reboot the whole operating system, we need to ask a very boring, very unsexy question. Where's the manual? Where did the previous Joy Boy leave the instructions for how to run the world without deleting yourself? That's where the Poneglyphs stop being cute lore rocks and start reading as hard drives. Indestructible stone records scattered across every ocean, storing different categories of data, historical logs of the Void Century, coordinates to living weapons that can rewrite continents, and then the 4-road Poneglyphs that, stitched together, triangulate Laugh-Tale itself. This isn't just foreshadowing in the fun mystery text sense. This is an author-level, in-universe documentation system. Somebody in that ancient kingdom knew, intentionally, that their first attempt might fail, and that someone else would need their notes. And I need you to notice who actually carved those notes. The Kazuki clan. Wano's isolationist stone nerds are the ones who had the tech and the craft to engrave unbreakable script that survived 800 years of world government temper tantrums, buster calls, and seastone mining. That means Wano isn't just important because samurai are cool. Wano is literally the ancient kingdom's backup server, the place that manufactured the memory cards for a contingency plan. Odin reading the stones, Momonosuke inheriting the ability to command Zunesha, the closed borders until the right time. That's not random. That's a scheduled task written centuries in advance. Here's the thing. That level of infrastructure is absurd if the One Piece is just a pile of gold or even a single magic device. You don't build a global, unbreakable, multi-language archive just to say, treasure's over there, X marks the spot. That's the storytelling equivalent of installing a NASA-grade security system on your fridge. The more reasonable interpretation is that the Poneglyph network is a guidance system for rerunning a complex multi-step world operation. Step-by-step documentation. Here's what we did. Here's what went wrong. Here's where the weapons are. Here's how you reach the control room. And the road Poneglyphs in particular. Those things scream lock and key. One in Wano. One in Whole Cake. One that used to be on Fishman Island. One that ended up in Zoo. 4 wildly disparate cultures. 4 totally different worldviews, none of which trust each other. To even assemble the full route, you have to do, in miniature, what Joy Boy is supposed to do at scale. Unite islands, earn trust, cross borders, and convince people who have every reason to stay hidden to hand you their piece of the map. The system is literally filtering for someone who can build a coalition before they're allowed near the enter button. So when fans treat Poneglyphs as just foreshadowing breadcrumbs for our benefit, I need you to zoom out. In-universe, they're the ancient kingdom's way of saying, we already ran this program once. We crashed the world. Here's our patch notes. Here's our bug report. Here's how you can try again. But better. Which raises a nastier question. If there's a manual, why is the current world so determined to burn every copy? May laugh tale? The control room, not the treasure chest. Which means we need to talk about the final island. Because if the Poneglyphs are the patch notes, Laugh Tale is not the loot chest at the end of the dungeon. It's the control room. You know the official story. Last island of the Grand Line, reachable only by road Poneglyphs, where the true history and the One Piece reside. This is the clean tourist brochure version the community repeats. Roger found Laugh Tale, discovered the true history, saw the treasure, laughed, left it there. Neat, tidy, emotionally satisfying. Also, I'm pretty sure it's wrong in the most important category. What that island is for. Here's the thing. If Laugh Tale was just a chest of gold or a single magic MacGuffin, you don't need a planetary scavenger hunt in an unbreakable language. You don't design an entire operating system of indestructible stone just to say, congrats, here's your pile of coins. That's not foreshadowing. That's a prank. The structure screams system access point. It's where you don't just learn the truth. You learn how to operate something world scale. Think about what we're told. Roger's crew gets there, reads everything, understands the Void Century, Joy Boy, the ancient weapons, the whole thing. And what do? They laugh, not a polite chuckle. They name the island Laugh Tale because the truth is that absurd. I need you to sit with that. These are pirates who've seen genocide, slavery, celestial dragons. The thing that breaks them is the realization that the entire world is living in the aftermath of a previous activation gone sideways. Roger explicitly says they were too early. That is such a loaded, author brain phrase. Too early for what? Not too early to open a chest. Too early for a condition, a timing window, a world state. That's software language. That's, you've reached the console, but the system can't execute the command yet. And suddenly his decision not to take the One Piece stops being noble minimalism and starts being basic operational safety. So I'm going to push this further. The One Piece might not be a single object at all. It might be partly information, instructions, designs, activation protocols, how to coordinate the ancient weapons, how to manipulate sea levels, currents, even planetary alignment. Remember, this author is obsessed with maps, routes, tides, the very geometry of the world. You don't foreshadow a red line, a calm belt, and a shattered ocean for 30 years just to say, cool setting, huh? And listen to me, because this is where the pattern-seeking monkey brain goes into overdrive. When we start talking about tides, moons, and the absolute nonsense that is One Piece sea level physics later, Laugh-Tale is going to stop reading as a finish line. It's going to read as a reset console for the planet. So, if there's a console, and there's a manual, and we know someone already hit run 800 years ago, what exactly happens when Luffy reaches the keyboard? The world is literally tilted. Tides, moons, and broken geography. So here's where I need you to stop thinking about the One Piece world as quirky and start treating it as evidence. Because once you line up the geography, the tides and the moons, it stops reading as random fantasy nonsense and starts reading as a crime scene. First, the obvious weirdness. The red line is a single, continuous continent that cuts the entire planet into quarters. That is not a normal tectonic decision. Then you have the Grand Line, a single equatorial belt with weaponized mood swings for weather, wrapped by two calm belts where wind and currents just clock out. No storms, no currents, just sea kings and unemployment. This is not a sin. This is not bad world building. This is a world that's been engineered into lanes. Now stack on top of that the moons, plural. We see multiple lunar bodies in the cover stories. We watch Enel go joyriding to a whole civilization on one of them, and Oda keeps drawing that sky as if he's begging the community to remember it. A planet with carved-up seas, artificial feeling currents, and a suspicious moon system. You are not in fun pirate map territory anymore. You are in somebody installed a planetary operating system territory. Here's the thing. Once you start asking, has the sea level always been like this? The story quietly screams, no. We have submerged cities with intact architecture, not just random ruins. We have Fishman Island sitting 10,000 meters under the red line, directly beneath Marineford, as if someone literally raised a wall and trapped an ocean beneath it. We have Noah, a continent-sized ark, explicitly built to move an entire population of fishermen and merfolk somewhere else when that day comes. That is not evacuation from a storm planning. That is sea-level event planning. And the author keeps threading this through in a way that feels very intentional. Ancient weapons that can erase islands or guide the sea kings. A kingdom in the past with technology advanced enough to build giant warships and weather-bending contraptions. A great cleansing that Imu can apparently just order on demand. When you put those in one storytelling category, they don't read as three separate superweapons. They read as components of a single, planned system for rearranging the map. Pattern interrupt. What if the world government isn't guarding power, but a schedule? Oda keeps coming back to cycles. The great era of piracy isn't the first. It's a recurring fever. The Will of D keeps resurfacing. Tides are rising. People in universe keep saying the world is about to turn over. Roger reaches Laugh-Tale and says they were too early, which only makes sense if the One Piece is keyed to external conditions. Sea levels, moons, something orbital you cannot brute force. So listen to me. The simplest, most boringly logical explanation is that the ancient kingdom already used this system once. Joy Boy hit the console when the moons, the tides, and the weapons all lined up, and the result was a tilted world, a missing century, and a government whose whole job is to delay the next activation. This is fine. This is normal sequel structure, which means Luffy isn't just chasing treasure, he's arriving at the next scheduled maintenance window for the planet. And if the last patch note for Earth was raise the oceans and erase a civilization, we need to ask a very uncomfortable question about what the next update does. Fishman Island, the ghost of joy, Boy's broken promise. So if the planet is on a timer, we need to go to the one place that has been staring at that countdown for centuries and calling it religion. Fishman Island. Listen to me, Fishman Island is not a quirky underwater detour. It is a museum exhibit of Joy Boy's failure that the author shoved in your face in the middle of the time skip. You get the apology Poneglyph. Joy Boy literally saying, "Sorry, I couldn't keep our promise." You get the promise itself. Move the fishman to the surface. You get the reveal that Shirahoshi is Poseidon, an ancient weapon whose whole job is commanding sea kings. And then, cherry on top, you get Madame Shiali's prophecy that the island will be destroyed by a man in a straw hat. That's not random. That's a case file. Here's the thing, that promise only makes sense during environmental upheaval. You don't need a god-tier sea princess, a continent-sized arc, and a written apology just to rent some condos on Sabadi. The planned migration of an entire species to the surface during an age of rising seas and shattered continents? That smells intentional. That smells like Joy Boy was coordinating with the same world-scale mechanism that raised the oceans and nuked a century of history. Noah and the Sea Kings are the smoking gun. The ship is literally called an ark. It's parked under the red line, sized for a mass exodus, and the only beings that can move it are colossal sea kings taking orders from Poseidon. That is not a war machine. That is public transit. That is an ancient weapon being used as planned infrastructure rather than a nuke. Fans keep putting ancient weapons in the super laser category, but Fishman Island is Oda quietly saying, what if the doomsday devices were also the evacuation plan? And then the plan just doesn't happen. The island stays under 10 kilometers of rock, crushed under the world's literal and political weight. The prophecy shifts from, we will go up, to one day, this place will be destroyed. Joy Boy vanishes, the ancient kingdom loses, the world government builds its capital on top of the red line, and Fishman Island gets locked into this tragic holding pattern where they are permanently about to be saved. This is not a sin in the writing. This is the point. The failure is baked into their mythology, which is where I need you to connect the dots. That whole apparatus, Noah, Poseidon, the apology, the prophecy, only exists because Joy Boy already pulled the trigger on something. Whatever the One Piece actually is, its prior use required a staged, species-level migration under the red line as a key step. Fishman Island is living in the aftermath of the first activation and waiting explicitly for a new Joy Boy to finish the script. So when Luffy shows up, breaks Noah, calms the Sea Kings, and gets framed by prophecy as both savior and destroyer, that's not vague foreshadowing. That's the author handing you a flowchart for how the One Piece works, then daring you to notice that the world is already mid-sequence. Which raises a nastier question. If Fishman Island was the evacuation route last time, who was the disaster for? Wano's closed borders, a lock on the planet's next phase. So if Fishman Island was the emergency exit, we need to ask, what door was it connected to? And this is where Wano stops being a quirky samurai theme park and turns into a planetary deadbolt. Quick lore refresher so we're on the same page. Wano shuts itself off from the world for centuries. No marines, no reverie, no trade. The Kazuki clan? They're not just feudal landlords. They are the original Poneglyph engineers, the people who literally carved the ancient kingdom's save files into indestructible stone. And under that isolated country, buried under layers of man-made geology, is Pluton. Not a rumor, not a metaphor. An ancient weapon parked under a national border policy. Now, Odin. Everyone in the community loves to summarize his dream as open Wano's borders and share the culture. This is cute. This is wholesome. This is also not what the text is doing. Odin reads Roger's journal, learns the void century truth, learns about Joy Boy, and immediately reframes Wano's isolation as a problem for the future war. He doesn't say, we should join the world government. He says the borders must be opened for Joy Boy, for the one who will carry that inherited will into a great conflict that will shake the planet. Here's the thing, that means the borders are not just social, they're mechanical. They are part of the One Piece device's safety settings. When Wano is closed, Pluton is inaccessible. When Pluton is inaccessible, 1/3 of the ancient weapon circuit is offline. No matter how pattern-seeking of a monkey you are, you can't see Jesus in the toast if the toaster is buried under a mountain. So I need you to stop treating Wano's isolation as flavor text and start treating it as a lockout timer. After the Void Century, after Joy Boy's failed or incomplete run, the ancient kingdom's surviving allies don't just scatter poneglyphs for fun. They deliberately seal away components. Poseidon is reborn in a bloodline that can't reach the surface. Uranus is somewhere in Imu's shadow. Pluton gets entombed under a country whose rulers swore in stone to keep the walls up until the next Joy Boy is actually ready. That's not vague foreshadowing. That's planned cooldown. You used the ultimate world reshaping system once. It triggered a great cleansing. And now the author has hard-coded a delay, so some random warlord can't speedrun the apocalypse, which makes Luffy's Wano run way scarier. He doesn't just free a country. He topples Kaido, disrupts the political pressure holding those borders shut, and hands Momonosuke the authority to eventually open them. In storytelling terms, he's not changing the script. He's re-enabling a function Joy Boy's allies intentionally disabled 800 years ago. Listen to me. When those waterfalls reverse and Pluton can move, that's not a new plot. That's the same machine booting back up. And the question isn't, will someone use it anymore? It's who gets there first when the lock finally clicks. Oh, Zunesha. The walking witness of the first activation. And if Pluton is the lock you can turn back on, then we need to talk about the weird, miserable key that's already been walking around the map for 1,000 years. Zunesha is not subtle. Giant elephant, continent on its back, endlessly trudging through the Grand Line. The story tells you, in big bold letters, this thing is ancient, it is punished, and it is obeying orders. Not vibes. Orders. When Momonosuke hears it near Wano, Zunesha doesn't go, "Hey, cool, a Kozuki." It goes, "Joy Boy, he has returned." That's not metaphor, that's system recognition. That's a login screen lighting up. Here's the thing, the punishment description is bizarrely specific. I committed a crime 800 years ago. I've been sentenced to walk, not killed, not sealed in some Hachinosu basement, condemned to wander. That phrasing screams Void Century operational role. You don't punish a random animal with an eternity of pathing errors. You leash a former asset. You keep the tool online but under humiliating constraints because you're terrified of what happens if it ever gets admin privileges again. So what category of tool are we talking about? Transport is the obvious one. A living aircraft carrier that can carry an entire civilization on its back. Communication is another. Zunesha speaks in that same voice of all things frequency that connects Roger, Oden, Luffy and Momo. But I need you to consider the nastier option. Zunesha as part of the literal mechanism that moved or reshaped landmasses when the One Piece was first used. A mobile pillar in a planetary scale machine. You don't just erase history, you rearrange the board. Pattern interrupt for your brain. What if Zunesha isn't walking randomly? What if that aimless path is a hard-coded route, a maintenance loop around seams in the world the ancient kingdom once pulled apart and stitched back together? Fans in this community love to map its sightings. We turn into that pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. But with Oda's pre-writing habits, the author absolutely could have planned this old elephant as the surviving gear in a weaponized tectonic engine. And notice the command structure. Zunesha only acts when ordered by someone carrying Joy Boy's will. It begs Momo, "Give me an order." It recognizes Luffy as Nika without being told a name. That implies Joy Boy once had direct authority over world-scale entities and systems. Not just friends with big animals, but root access to the operating system of the planet. That is exactly what you'd expect from someone who already activated the One Piece's full feature set and then lost the war. So Zunesha becomes narrative foreshadowing in the purest, most intentional sense. A living, breathing reminder that the last time someone tried to change the world with this power, even the tools got sentenced. The gun on the mantelpiece is still walking laps, which raises the real problem. If the walking witness is still here, what else from that first activation survived? And what happens when it all starts answering Joy Boy's call again? Nika and the Sun God. Retrofitted myth or pre-written role? So when the walking gun starts answering Joy Boy's phone again, we hit the big hot button topic the community cannot shut up about. Nika, I need you to stay with me here, because this is where fans either start worshipping Oda as a time-traveling god or dismiss the whole thing as he made it up in Wano. Here's the thing, the Nika reveal is both. It's pre-writing and retrofitting at the same time. On paper, we learn that Luffy's rubber fruit was never the Gomu Gomu no Mi. It was the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, a human fruit modeled on a sun god of liberation, whose awakening turns the user into a joyously absurd cartoon that frees people just by existing. Zunesha literally calls it Joy Boy returning. That is not subtle. Now, do I think Oda had the exact word Nika and the silhouette with the drumbeat hair and the Tom and Jerry physics design documented in 1997? No. This is normal. This is not a sin. Naming, aesthetic details, the specific drumming pose on the rooftop. Those are the kinds of things an author can lock in much later without breaking anything. But the category of character Nika represents, the liberation figure tied to a special fruit whose will echoes Joy Boy, that's been there forever. From chapter 1, Luffy is a freedom zealot. His entire personality is, I will be the freest man on the seas. His rubber body lets him ignore blunt trauma, bounce back from everything, and move with this exaggerated, almost Looney Tunes energy. Even pre-time skip, he's being drawn with that elastic comedic timing that now reads as Gear 5 foreshadowing once you know what you're looking at. What Oda does in Wano is retroactively stamp a logo on all of that. He goes back and says, that smile in Logetown facing execution, that laugh in Skypiea under the sun, that insistence in Sabaody that he doesn't want to conquer anything, just be free. Congratulations, those weren't random character beats. Those were the behavioral symptoms of the Nika identity slowly syncing with its host. The retrofit doesn't contradict the old panels. It explains why they were so consistent. And that's where pre-writing slides back in. Because Nika isn't just a cool new form. Nika is a role in the world's operating system. A recurring avatar of Joy Boy's will that surfaces whenever the world hits the right pressure cooker state and the One Piece can be attempted again. Roger's crew reaching Laugh Tale and saying they were too early suddenly sounds less poetic and more technical. The program couldn't run. The avatar hadn't spawned. So whether the word Nika was on Oda's corkboard from day one or got penciled in around Dressrosa, the function is the same. Luffy is not a random lucky D. He is literally the next scheduled instance of the job Joy Boy held when the One Piece was first used. And if the job has respawned, we need to ask what other Void Century systems are quietly booting back up with him. The D Clan. Survivors or co-conspirators of the first endgame. So if Luffy is the respawned job of Joy Boy, listen to me. That job keeps spawning in one very specific bloodline category. The people with the middle initial that has no phonetic purpose and every narrative purpose. The D. You know the roster. Luffy, Roger, Garp, Dragon, Blackbeard Teach, Law, Ace, Saul, Rouge. Even the weird footnotes, like Roxy Zebek sitting in the margins of a history book the world government tried to burn. Different morals, different goals, same habit. They walk into rigid, oppressive structures and kick the legs out from under the table. Marines, Garp punches celestial dragons. Revolutionaries, Dragon builds an organization whose entire brand is abolish the current world. Pirates, Roger and Luffy both trigger global paradigm shifts just by existing. Teach weaponizes chaos itself. Law literally operates as a surgeon on the status quo. This is not a coincidence. This is foreshadowing by casting choice. The author keeps stamping that D onto the people who end up at inflection points, and the community keeps going, wow, what a fun quirk. No, the quirk is the point. Here's the thing. The The story outright tells you what the D are in relation to the current system. The natural enemy of God. That line is doing double duty. In universe, the celestial dragons posture as gods, the Gorosei sit under a giant straw hat, and Imu literally sits on an empty throne that says, "No one rules the world while ruling the world." Out of universe, that phrase is Oda taking the world government's divine right propaganda and flipping it. If the world nobles are gods, then the D are hard-coded blasphemy. So where does that come from? We need to game out two intentional, planned options. Option 1. The D are the surviving core of the ancient kingdom itself. The royal house, the researchers, the engineers who built the world mechanism we call the One Piece, used it and got wiped. Option 2. They're descended from the traitors to the 20 Kingdom Alliance. The people who saw what happened after the One Piece was used, refused the cover-up, and had their entire bloodline downgraded to a middle initial and a death sentence. Those aren't separate theories. They chain together. You can have ancient kingdom insiders who, after seeing the result of their own endgame, turn on the new regime that tries to bury it. Survivors and whistleblowers in one package. And notice where DS always materialize. Rox, D, Zibek tries to topple the celestial dragons in God Valley. Roger reaches Laugh-Tale, D codes the Void Century, and then chooses not to use the mechanism again because he's too early. Luffy retraces Roger's path beat for beat, inherits the Nika job, and accidentally restarts every dormant Void Century problem on the map. These people are narrative magnets. History bends around them. That's not symbolic. That's system design. The One Piece isn't just waiting for a worthy heart. It's keyed to a bloodline that already paid the price once. The D are the built-in user account for the same world-altering function Joy Boy activated 800 years ago, which raises a much worse question than, who are they? If the software is booting and the user has logged back in, what exactly is the program about to run this time? By pattern-seeking monkeys, how fandom overcredits Oda. And this is where I need you to slow down your inner conspiracy theorist for a second. You hear program about to run, user logging back in, and your brain, my brain, the entire One Piece community's collective brain immediately starts drawing red strings on the corkboard. The tides, the moons, the D initial, the number of freckles on that one fish in chapter 37. We are pattern-seeking monkeys. We are very proud pattern-seeking monkeys. And when you hand a pattern-seeking monkey a 25-year-long manga, it will start seeing Jesus in Toast by volume 3. Here's the thing. Humans are wired to connect dots, even when the author did not put those dots there on purpose. This is called pareidolia. Your brain fills in faces in clouds, animals in wood grain, secret foreshadowing in every background seagull. Then, once a reveal happens, confirmation bias kicks in. We run back through thousands of panels and go, see? That one background fish was totally foreshadowing Poseidon. No, that was Oda drawing a fish because the ocean is wet. You know the posts. That random moon panel in East Blue. Clearly Oda planned Enel's cover story, the fairy Verth, the robot army, and the Lunarian genocide from day one. Or, this one circular window is obviously Uranus symbolism. I'm exaggerating, but only a little, and you know it. This is not a sin. This is not bad reading. This is normal. This is what our brains do when we love a story and we want the author to be an omniscient chess god. The problem is that overcrediting everything as 4D foreshadowing actually makes it harder to see the real, deliberate machinery. When every fish is Poseidon and every moon is Enel, you miss the structural repetition Oda actually built. Joy Boy's failed plan, the erased century, the ancient weapons, and then Luffy reenacting the same voyage with the same user account 800 years later. That is not Jesus in Toast energy. That is planned, architectural storytelling. Pattern interrupt. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes a cool panel is just a cool panel. Not every tear-shaped splash of water is a clue about Shirahoshi's birth horoscope. So we need to draw a line. There is a difference between intentional pre-writing and us reverse engineering meaning because it feels good. When Roger's crew says they were too early, that is intentional. When the Poneglyph network literally guides Luffy through Joy Boy's route, that is intentional. When a random background NPC happens to share a silhouette with a character Oda designs 10 years later, that is probably Oda reusing a shape because deadlines are real. Listen to me. I am going to keep calling this out. I am going to keep saying, no, that's retrofit. Or, no, that's just toast. Even if it annoys you. Because the real craft deserves to stand out. If everything is foreshadowing, nothing is. And once we clear that noise away, we can finally zoom in on the big one. The repeating endgame pattern that proves the One Piece has already been used once and is being set up, carefully, intentionally, to be used again. Bow? Receipts time. East Blue to Alabasta, and the first hints of a broken world. So let's start cashing receipts, because if I just rant about pre-written endgame without touching East Blue, you're absolutely right to close the tab. We go all the way back to Chapter 1, and the world is already off. The Grand Line isn't presented as a normal ocean with stronger storms. It's a narrative glitch. Unpredictable weather, magnetic fields that don't obey compasses, islands where the climate never changes. That's not just flavor text. That's an author quietly telling you the planet itself has been tampered with. You don't invent cursed magnetism on accident. Then you get these early, vague hints of a lost history. Not the Void Century by name yet, but the way people talk around it. Shanks and Mihawk treating the age of pirates as a phase, not a beginning. Nami's map dream framed against an already partitioned world. The world government pops up through marines and bounties, and the community often treats that as standard shonen cops. But listen to me. They're global. They're ancient. And nobody ever explains who gave them the right to own the sea. That's a narrative omission. An intentional blank spot. Logtown is where Oda basically stands on a chair and yells, "This is a cycle." Roger's execution isn't just a cool flashback. It's the first time the story tells you that inherited will is the real protagonist. Roger smiles, announces the treasure, and the entire era resets. Luffy stands in the same place, in a storm, grinning at death. You can read that as generic parallelism, sure, or you can see it as pre-writing. The author already knows Joy Boy, already knows that the Pirate King pattern has run at least twice, and is staging Luffy as Iteration 3. Then we hit Alabasta, and the subtext stops being shy. Poneglyphs. The word history suddenly becomes dangerous. Robin isn't just a cool assassin, she is a walking crime because she can read stones the government wants erased. This is not a sin, by the way. This is how you telegraph that knowledge itself is a weapon. On top of that, we meet our first ancient weapon, Pluton. Not a rumour, not a metaphor. A named superweapon tied directly to a poneglyph in Alabasta and blueprints in Water 7. The government's reaction is pure terror. They don't want it built. They don't want it remembered. They don't even want the instructions to exist. Here's the thing. That is not how you treat a hypothetical. That's how you treat something that already did catastrophic work once. So how do we categorize all this? The existence of poneglyphs, the idea of ancient weapons, the erased century. That's pre-written pillar territory. You don't casually introduce indestructible history stones and a triad of world-ending machines if you don't already have an 800-year backstory on your desk. The exact specs of Pluton, the design of the ship, the details of how it fires. Those feel more flexible, the kind of thing you can refine later without breaking the spine of the plan. Even here, in simple East Blue to Alabasta, the story is whispering the same sentence over and over. Something happened 800 years ago involving these stones, these weapons, and this sea. The world was broken on purpose, the records were burned, and the current era is being steered toward a rerun. And if this is how loud the whisper is this early, wait until we hit Skypiea and Eni's lobby, where Oda stops whispering and starts screaming. Skypiea, the prototype for Laugh Tale's revelation. So when the story starts screaming, it drops you on a floating island made of clouds and dares you to take it seriously. Skypiea is the moment a lot of fans tap out and say, "Fill a detour." And I need you to understand that this is the rehearsal room for the Void Century. It's Oda running the entire endgame structure at 1/10th scale to see if you're paying attention. Run the beats. You have a mythic sky island no one on the blue sea believes exists. A ruined golden city, Shandora, that's been wiped from common memory and reduced to a bedtime story. A war over resources and who owns the sky, culminating in a lunatic god firing a giant laser at the island. And buried under all that, a poneglyph. Not just any poneglyph, a poneglyph with a message from Goldie Roger himself. Here's the thing, this is the first time we actually watch Nico Robin do the job the story has been threatening she can do. She walks into the heart of a forgotten civilization, brushes aside 400 years of dust, and casually reads state-level war crimes. The poneglyph doesn't just mention Poseidon, it carries a personal note from Roger to Joy Boy. That's insane. That is the author handing you, in 2003, the emotional texture of Laugh Tale without saying the words. Foreshadowing in Skypiea isn't, haha, mantra is secretly hacky. That's the shallow reading the community gets stuck on, because we're pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. The real intentional setup is structural. Robin finds a local stone that points to a global stone. The Rio Poneglyph suddenly stops being a vague concept and becomes a method. Scattered fragments, each with a piece of the erased truth, waiting for the one person who can read them. That's Laugh Tale in miniature. And Shandora itself? It's a thematic cosplay of the ancient kingdom, a technologically advanced city that built a giant bell, carved forbidden history into stone, and got annihilated in a resource conflict about the sky and who gets to sit above whom. This is not a sin, this is not bad subtlety, this is Oda waving a neon sign that says, "The world you see is built on top of a graveyard." The knock-up stream, the empty island, the cloud sea. They're all rehearsals for you accepting that the current era is the weird, broken version of what came before. And then there's Enel, the walking retrofit magnet. Yes, his moon trip and the space robots clearly got expanded later into broader lore. This is fine, this is normal. But in category, his function is precise. A self-proclaimed god, ruling a fake heaven, fleeing to the moon when his toy breaks. It's a dress rehearsal for celestial politics, for the idea that the real stage of this story is not just the ocean, but the sky, the moons, the sea levels themselves. Skypiea is training. It teaches you how it feels when a lost civilization snaps into focus, when you realize the adventure of the week was actually a crime scene. And once you've swallowed that, Oda can finally ask the real question. What happens when the poneglyphs don't just tell you history, but show you what someone already did with the One Piece? Water 7 to Enia's lobby. Blueprints, buster calls, and controlled destruction. So once Skypiea trains you to recognize a crime scene, Water 7 and Eni's lobby drag you to the active demolition site. The yellow tape is still up. The wrecking crew is still swinging, and in the middle of it, Oda quietly hands you the user manual for how the last world got erased. Start with Tom. This big, huggable war criminal is sitting on the blueprints for Pluton. Not just a super battleship, but a design that can either build an ancient weapon or counter one. The story literally tells you both readings. That ambiguity is the point. The world government doesn't care which category it falls into. They just need it gone. That obsession is not about one ship. It's about any technology that could recreate or resist whatever ended the ancient kingdom. Here's the thing. The moment Spandam waves that buster call, you're supposed to remember O'Hara's crater, not just Robin's trauma. A buster call is a portable, bureaucratized, void century. 10 battleships, 5 vice admirals, and a mandate to scrub an island off the map. It is a smaller scale echo of the original Cataclysm, mass-produced and put on speed dial. Press this snail to simulate the apocalypse. That is not subtle foreshadowing. That is the author holding up a toy version of the weaponized justice that built this world. And then we get Robin. Listen to me. Robin's backstory is the series putting its thesis statement in all caps. Ohara's scholars are not building cannons. They are reading. They are trying to uncover the void century. The response? Total annihilation. An island of librarians gets the same treatment as a Yonko stronghold. The narrative even spells it out. The lost history is dangerous to the current world order, not the weapons themselves. The information. The knowledge that something was done with those weapons 800 years ago. I need you to clock how intentional this is. Tom holds the means to recreate or oppose Pluton. Ohara holds the means to explain why Pluton mattered in the first place. Both are erased with the same tool, a buster call. That's not random cruelty. That is controlled destruction. The government isn't just suppressing hardware. It's suppressing the patch notes for reality. This is where we need to stop pretending this is just tragic backstory seasoning. Ohara and the Buster Call are carefully planned foreshadowing for the stakes of learning what the One Piece already did. The moment you see an island vaporized over history homework, you should realize what happens when someone reaches Laugh Tale with the full context and the means to act on it. Pattern Interrupt. By Eni's Lobby, the scariest thing in One Piece is not a laser or a sea quake or a giant cannon. It's a book. It's a blueprint. It's a name on a stone. Oda has fully committed to the idea that information itself is as dangerous as any physical weapon. That fits the One Piece's system model perfectly. The true endgame isn't just a treasure, it's an operating manual for the world. And the last time someone read it and hit run, an entire century disappeared, which means, going forward, every time you see a poneglyph, you're not just seeing lore, you're seeing an instruction line in a program that has already been executed once. Thriller, Bark to Sabadi, Shadows of a World Out of Balance. And once you realize the program has already been run once, you start noticing all the places where the world is glitching. Thriller Bark is one of those places. It feels goofy on the surface, Halloween filler, but listen to me. Oda is smuggling horror in under a Scooby-Doo mask. Mariah is your first big warning. Here's a guy who already did the New World Tour. He went in with a real crew, real dreams, real strength. He crawled out alone and decided, cool, I'm never trusting humans again. I'm just going to staple shadows onto corpses. That's not standard shonen power creep. That's trauma. That's the writing equivalent of a character walking on screen with PTSD stamped on their forehead and the author refusing to explain what detonated them. The community treats Moria as a joke villain. This is normal. This is fine. But from a foreshadowing perspective, he's an example of something much scarier. The system out there is so broken, it can shatter a warlord and nobody even blinks. Thriller Bark hints that the new world isn't just strong, it's wrong. There is a qualitative difference between harder bosses, and this ocean is structurally cursed by history. Then we hit Sabaody, and Oda rips the mask off. No more fog, no more cartoon zombies, just chains. The celestial dragons stroll in with their fishbowl helmets and god complex, buying people at a human auction house the way you'd buy a used car. And the story finally says out loud, these are the descendants of the 20 kings who built the current order after the Void Century. Here's the thing, that's not random world building. That's an intentional bridge. Oda is dragging a straight line from mysterious erased century to this is how your favorite goofy pirate setting actually runs. All that surface level fun you've been having. Bubble bikes, mangrove trees, supernova flexing. It's sitting on top of industrialized slavery. The tonal whiplash is the point. We need to feel that sick drop in our stomach when a mermaid's price gets announced while Luffy is still arguing about coating, and then Kuma walks in. Or rather Kuma and the Pacifista production line. This is where the author stops hinting and just throws the theme at your face. Mass-produced weapons based on a human template. Laser beams that scream, this world has ancient kingdom tech, but it's being run through a fascist photocopier. You don't even need Vegapunk exposition yet. Your pattern-seeking monkey brain is already seeing Jesus in the cyborg toast. From a storytelling category perspective, Thriller Bark and Sabaody are emotional pre-writing for the Void Century reveal. Oda is not just telling you the world is unjust, he's making you hate it. He's making fans viscerally resent the idea that this hierarchy, this slave system, this weaponization of science, was the solution the 20 Kings chose after the One Piece was first used. So when we eventually hear that the current world order is a reaction, a patch slapped over Joy Boy's original program, your desire to see it uninstalled isn't theoretical. It's earned. And the new world is about to start showing you just how far that patch will go to protect itself. Marineford and the time skip. A world stalling for time. So when I say the patch will go as far as it has to, Marineford is the stress test. Marineford is the operating system blue screening in real time and choosing a hard reset over fixing the actual bug. And listen to me, that war is not just a cool midpoint spectacle. It is the world government trying to stall a sequel they know is already queued up. Run the outcomes. Whitebeard dies. The old pillar of the sea, the man whose mere existence kept pirates and marines in a tense, manageable equilibrium, gets removed from the board on live television. Ace dies. The bloodline of the Pirate King, the son of the man who reached Laughtail and heard the Void Century's punchline, is symbolically executed as a warning. And in the middle of that carefully staged execution theatre, Whitebeard grabs the mic and does the one thing the author absolutely planned from day one. He tells the entire world that the One Piece is real. That's not fan service. That's not a hype line Oda tossed in at the last second. That is intentional, structural foreshadowing. The dying remnant of the last era announcing on camera that the conditions for the next endgame are almost met. The One Piece is real is not just about treasure. It's a status report. It's Whitebeard saying, the world has reached the threshold again. The board is filling with Ds, ancient weapons are stirring, and another Joy Boy-shaped problem is statistically guaranteed. So from our perspective, Marineford is tragedy. From theirs, it's containment. Kill Ace so Roger's will doesn't get another neat marketable symbol. Kill Whitebeard so the last person who personally remembers the previous balance can't shepherd a new generation. Flex the Marine's power on every transponder snail so potential Joy Boys at home decide to stay fishermen. This is not a sin. This is not cartoon villain stupidity. This is exactly what you do. If you know the last time a charismatic pirate reached the One Piece, your entire century got erased. Which brings us to the time skip. We need to talk about how weird it is that the story literally pauses. Everyone trains. The crews reorganize. The Shichibukai system mutates. Blackbeard ascends. The three powers rebalance. On the surface, this is fine. This is normal shonen pacing. The hero gets a montage. But here's the thing. In universe, that 2-year gap is the world government praying that preparation stays one-sided. They're buying time. Time to perfect pacifistas. Time to move pieces toward the throne we now know isn't empty. Time to hunt Ohara's survivors and anyone who can read the Poneglyphs that would let a new Joy Boy actually use the One Piece instead of just reaching it too early, Roger style. And of course, because Oda is an author obsessed with cycles, that midpoint is exactly where the story stops pretending. After Marineford and the skip, the Void Century stops being rumour and starts being plot. Poneglyph roots converge. Ancient weapons names move from theory threads to chapter titles. Every arc from here accelerates toward reconstructing the same configuration of forces that existed 800 years ago when the One Piece was first used, which raises the uncomfortable question the story keeps edging toward and then swerving away from. If history is being rebuilt piece by piece, what happens when someone finally presses run on the program again? Fishman Island. Revisited. Prophecies and second chances. So to answer that, we need to go back underwater. We need to go back to the arc everyone speedran on their reread because nothing important happens there. And then Oda casually said, "Oh, by the way, she's an ancient weapon." Fishman Island is the point where the story stops hinting and just says the quiet part out loud, because post-time skip, that arc reads totally different. At the time, fans were arguing about power scaling and candy factories, while Oda was calmly revealing that Shirahoshi is Poseidon. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally the same ancient weapon title from the Void Century, reborn in a crying teenager who apologizes to jellyfish. That's not a cute coincidence. That is the author putting a giant neon sign on the wall that says, "The board has been reset, the pieces are in place again." And then you stack that on top of the prophecy. Madame Shiali doesn't just say, "Oh no, disaster." She gives a very specific, very loaded prediction. Fishman Island will be destroyed when the promised time comes, and a straw hat will be at the center of it. That's not random apocalypse energy. That is scheduled maintenance on a planetary scale. Here's the thing. Fishman Island is physically a stopgap solution. It exists under the red line, under a giant bubble, under a system that already makes no long-term geological sense. The prophecy is not tragic flood incoming. It's the story telling you this location was always temporary, a waiting room until the world is reconfigured. Joy Boy's original promise to Noah and the merfolk. That was phase 1 of that configuration. He failed. The ship stayed parked. The world stayed wrong. Listen to me. When Shirahoshi awakens as Poseidon, that is not a new weapon entering the narrative. That is a required component respawning so the program can be run again. The Sea Kings literally talk about waiting for the correct sovereigns to appear, plural, so they can finally move Noah. That's a system prompt, not a prophecy poem. The difference matters, because it shifts this from maybe foreshadowing into definitely pre-writing. And then Luffy walks in and does the most Luffy thing possible. He promises to protect everyone and punches a prophecy in the face. He swears to protect Shirahoshi. He swears to protect Fishman Island. He plants his flag on the exact same fault line Joy Boy stood on and says, "Run it back, but this time I win." The community loves to treat that as generic shonen bravado. It isn't. It's a conscious reenactment of an 800-year-old role, with more information, more allies, and the literal ancient weapon on his side. I need you to see how explicit this is. Fishman Island is the clearest textual admission that the story is about finishing a pre-existing plan. We're not building a brand new future from scratch. We're finally cashing an ancient check that bounced. The problem isn't, will someone change the world? The problem is, can someone survive using the same world-changing mechanism that already blew everything up once? Which raises an even worse question. If Fishman Island is the waiting room, what exactly is the surgery being prepped on the surface? Dressrosa to whole cake. Yonko as guardians of a broken status quo. So if Fishman Island is the waiting room, Dressrosa through whole cake is the hospital hallway where the doors are locked on purpose. Because once you hit the new world, the world's surgery isn't theoretical anymore. It's been chopped up and handed to 4 different warlords in Emperor cosplay. Here's the thing. The Yonko system is sold to you as chaos. 4 semi-independent emperors, each carving the sea into personal fiefdoms, each with their own flag, currency, and HR department. But functionally, it's a containment grid. Kaido runs Wano. Big Mom runs Totoland. Shanks and Blackbeard hold their own spheres. The new world is not a frontier. It's a partitioned server farm with 4 root admins. I need you to notice how bureaucratic that actually is. Every island you hit from Dressrosa onward comes pre-assigned to a Yonko. Punk Hazard is Kaido's lab. Dressrosa is Doflamingo, who is Kaido's supplier. Zoo is a walking trauma ward hiding a road poneglyph. Whole Cake is Big Mum's candy-coated surveillance state. The map is fragmented so that no single pirate crew can just stroll through and hoover up history. Now zoom in on Kaido and Big Mom's hobbies, because they're not random villain flavor. These two are obsessed with ancient species, giants, and building their own worlds. Kaido wants a war that reshapes the entire balance, backed by an army of smile beasts and literal dragons. Big Mom wants a utopia of all races gathered under her roof, and she will absolutely commit hate crimes to get her diversity quota. This is not a sin in terms of writing. This is pointed foreshadowing. These are twisted echoes of an ancient kingdom that actually had the tech and the bloodlines to reshape the globe. Dressrosa and Whole Cake are the first time the story quietly tells you. The dream of creating a new world has already been run through the simulator once, and the people who inherited the scraps are doing corrupted speedruns of it. And sitting right at the center of that, the road Poneglyphs. 2 of the 4 literal keys to Laughtale are in Yonko vaults, one in Big Mom's treasure room, one embedded in Wano under Kaido's boot. Another sits with Zu, guarded by a closed nation of giant minks with ancient ties. The last one used to be with a Yonko-adjacent fish, Whitebeard, then maybe Shanks. That distribution is not an accident. Whether by author fiat in the writing or in universe design, the most dangerous coordinates in existence are stored behind 4 separate boss fights. So the Yonko era that fans talk about as the Age of Pirates. Functionally, it's a world government firewall. You don't need to control the new world if you can make it statistically impossible for anyone to collect all 4 road Poneglyphs without getting erased by an emperor first. This is fine for the Gorosei. This is normal for Emu. Let the monsters babysit the keys. Which is why Luffy's Yonko takedown tour is not just career advancement, it's prerequisite maintenance. You cannot even test the One Piece's world-changing mechanism again until someone dismantles the 4-way lock Oda has been very intentionally drawing since Dressrosa. And once that lock is gone, we need to ask a worse question. Who else has been quietly preparing to press the button the second those coordinates go public? Wano and the on-stage reveal. When the skeleton starts talking. And this is where Wano stops being a cool samurai detour and turns into the stage where the skeleton of the Void Sentry just walks on screen and starts talking. Listen to me. This is the first arc where Oda stops coyly hinting and has characters literally say the words. Joy Boy, Pluton, the borders of Wano. Zunesha lumbering in from Zoe with a telepathic, I hear the drums. This is not background flavour. This is the author standing up in the theatre and yelling, hey, the endgame is over here. Wano is packed with explicit, intentional statements that collapse 800 years into the present tense. Toki jumps from the Void Century. Oden's journal spells out that Wano once had open borders and deliberately closed them for a future moment. Momonosuke hears Zunesha, and Zunesha says it has been waiting for Joy Boy's return. Not metaphorically, waiting. As in, there was a Joy Boy before, and the job is not finished. Then you get the line that should have detonated the community more than any Gear 5 panel. Opening Wano's borders is necessary not just for Wano's sake, but for the world. The country is literally a plug in the planet. Remove it and something global happens. That's not a random national policy. That's infrastructure. Here's the thing. When Oda reveals Pluton is under Wano, under a giant artificially raised bowl of land holding back the sea, you are not allowed to file that under cool coincidence. The geography is engineered. The walls, the flooded ancient Wano below. The fact that the Poneglyphs have been pointing us here since Alabasta, where Crocodile was already drooling over Pluton's blueprints. Someone in the ancient kingdom built a vault, put a weapon in it, and then built a country on top as the lid. That is not foreshadowing in the cute, oh, the hat was in chapter 3 sense. That is pre-writing architecture. The author knew there was a super weapon under Samurai Japan before he drew a single Sakura petal. You do not accidentally put a civilization-scale doomsday device under your most isolated nation and then have multiple characters say, when the time is right, we'll open this and the world will change. Wano is where the Void Century stops being an abstract lore category and becomes a physical set. The players and tools of that lost war are literally under the cast's feet. Zunesha walked through that war. Toki fled it. Pluton was parked for the sequel. Joy Boy's name is spoken on screen as an inherited role, not a trivia answer. At that point, I need you to admit the only coherent reading is that somebody already ran this final saga once. They reached Laugh Tale. They used the One Piece and its weapons. They changed the world so hard, the world government had to erase an entire century and bolt Wano shut as a failsafe. And if that's true, then the real question isn't, what is the One Piece anymore? It's, what went wrong the first time? And who's planning to fix or repeat that outcome when the lid finally comes off? Egghead and the Dr. Vegapunk info dump, confirmation by Science Guy. And this is where Egghead quietly walks on stage and says, "Hey, everything you're afraid of about the Void Century? It's not a myth, it's engineering." Because Vegapunk is not a prophet or a chosen one. He's a nerd with receipts, and the receipts all point in one direction. Somebody already pulled the trigger on the world once. Here's the thing. Vegapunk's whole info dump is structured as a scientific autopsy of that first run. He tells you the true history is so dangerous that simply knowing it gets Island's Buster called. He confirms the ancient kingdom had absurd technology, way beyond modern standards, and he's been intentionally trying to recreate it. Giant robots, laser beams, weather control, the whole "what if Tesla had a death wish" catalogue. The problem isn't that the past is mysterious. The problem is that he is rebuilding it in real time. Then he drops the real bomb. An unknown ancient energy source, a power system that once fueled an entire civilization, that he can barely scrape a sample of, and that the world government is terrified of. That isn't foreshadowing in the cute, ooh, a shadowy silhouette category. That is the author planting a giant neon sign that says there was a battery big enough to move continents, and someone already hooked it up. Now connect that to what we've actually seen. Imu's Island eraser isn't running on coal. The mother flame, Uranus, whatever name you want to slap on it, is clearly drawing from the same category of impossible energy the ancient kingdom mastered. Vegapunk literally says his research into that power was used to create the current weapon. So when fans ask, what does the One Piece control? I need you to remember, the story has already shown us a global-scale energy grid that can be pointed at cities and turned to ash. Vegapunk's terrified not because power is inherently evil, but because history already ran this experiment. He spells it out. If humanity rediscovers and uses this energy wrong, we get a repeat of the catastrophe that ended the Void Century. That's the subtext. The last time someone turned the system on, the world broke so hard they erased 100 years and built a government around pretending it never happened. And Egghead itself is the visual foreshadowing. A hyper-futuristic island, floating machines, holograms, robots, all sitting in a world where most people are still swinging swords on wooden ships. It's a diorama of the ancient kingdom dropped into the present. This is not a sin. This is not bad world building. This is Oda giving you a concrete example of what was lost. So Vegapunk becomes the in-universe guy standing on a burning oil rig yelling, "We need to stop reenacting the disaster movie." Listen to me. His whole speech is, we are on track to repeat the same experiment that broke the world last time. That is the already used argument, but spoken through a scientist who can measure the fallout. And the pattern-seeking monkey in my brain that sees Jesus in toast is screaming, because if Egghead is the rehearsal, then Laugh Tale is the live show. Which raises the next problem. If the stage is being rebuilt, who's actually planning to run the sequel, Luffy, or the people already holding the off switch? So, what is the One Piece functionally? So here's where we need to stop thinking in treasure chest brain and start thinking in world system brain. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the One Piece is a tree, or a reactor, or a cosmic Wi-Fi router. That's the wrong category. The question isn't what object is it? The question is, what does it do in the architecture of this story? And once you frame it that way, the patterns stop being cute foreshadowing and start looking intentional to a frankly rude degree. Functionally, the One Piece reads as a composite tool. Information, access, power routing. In that order. You get the true history and the instructions. The Poneglyph network, Joy Boy's apology. The Void Century record. You get access. Laugh Tale itself. Whatever control interfaces or terminals the ancient kingdom built. And then you get power routing. The thing that actually links Poseidon, Pluton, Uranus, the red line, the sea levels, the moons, all of it, into one configurable system. The treasure is the ability to log in, understand the settings, and then push a world-scale button on purpose. Which is exactly why Roger was too early, not spiritually, systemically. The author goes out of his way to have the crew say that line after they've seen everything. The problem isn't that the One Piece wasn't ready, it's that the world wasn't in a state where reactivation would be anything but a controlled demolition. Too few allies who knew the truth. Too much centralized power in the hands of a government that could instantly weaponize any upheaval. Technologically, the rest of the planet is a mess of scattered islands and suppressed research. Environmentally, the sea routes, the calm belts, the red line barriers all still favor the status quo. So Roger does the only responsible thing you can do when you've opened the admin panel and realized hitting apply changes will brick the server. He logs out, laughs, and leaves a tutorial for the next user. This is not a sin. This is not cowardice. This is long-term, pre-written storytelling discipline. Now roll back 800 years. Joy Boy's era is the version where they actually hit the button. The activation window opens. You have an advanced ancient kingdom, ancient weapons online, a global network of allies and technology. But either the unity isn't there or the foresight isn't. They pull the trigger without modeling the backlash. Result? A war so catastrophic it erases a century of history, forces the creation of the world government as a containment regime, and kicks off an ongoing great cleansing protocol to prevent anyone from reconstructing the manual. Listen to me, that is not a one-use nuke. That is a reusable control system with guardrails. The Void Century is the first major run. Roger is the dry run. Luffy is the second activation attempt the narrative actually wants us to watch succeed. So when fans say, what if the One Piece was already used? The answer is, yes, obviously that's the point. The whole foreshadowing game has been telling you this. The One Piece is designed to be used multiple times, but only when certain political, technological, and environmental conditions line up. And the terrifying question the next section has to answer is, who's really making sure those conditions line up now? Why calling all of this foreshadowing misses the point? So when you hear all that, and your first instinct is, wow, Oda foreshadowed everything, I need you to slow down for a second, because when the community slaps the foreshadowing label on every cool payoff, we actually erase the thing that makes this whole machine terrifyingly impressive in the first place. Remember our 3 buckets. We have prewriting, we have retrofitting, we have actual foreshadowing. If you sort the Joy Boy / One Piece / world-breaking stuff into those categories, the pattern gets way more interesting than genius author planned it all on day one. The Poneglyph network, the Void Century, the existence of an ancient kingdom that already did a final saga 800 years ago. That's pre-writing. That's the skeleton. The decision that someone already used the One Piece and broke the world is baked into the bones. Then you've got the brand work. Nika's specific sun god imagery, the drummed heartbeat, some of the Will of D details, the way Luffy's silhouette keeps getting quietly echoed in murals and legends. A lot of that is retrofitting. This is not a sin. This is normal. An author sees where the story is emotionally landing after 10-15 years and starts bending older, fuzzier details to sharpen that theme. Oda sees a goofy rubber boy and gradually grafts a liberation deity onto him without snapping continuity. That's the flex. Actual foreshadowing is narrower. It's the concrete promises and prophecies. Roger saying they were too early at Laugh Tale. The repeated warnings that when someone gathers the ancient weapons, the world will literally tilt. The way Odin frames the 20-year time jump as a timed bomb. Those are Chekhov's guns. Those are the intentional setups for specific known payoffs. Here's the thing. Insisting Oda had every detail of Joy Boy, Imu, Uranus, and the exact sea-level mechanics pinned to a corkboard in 1997 is not only unrealistic, it undersells how hard this kind of long-form storytelling actually is. The real achievement isn't omniscient pre-planning. The real achievement is spending decades orbiting one core idea. Someone already used the One Piece and broke the world. And then tightening that orbit, lap after lap, reveal after reveal, without spiraling into nonsense. When you flatten all of that into "he foreshadowed it," you turn a brutal, iterative craft problem into a magic trick. You stop seeing the constant micro-adjustments, how Nika branding gets woven into Skypiea sun motifs, how Imu's great cleansing recontextualizes Ohara, how every new ancient weapon hint has to thread through Alabasta, Water 7, Fishman Island without contradiction. Listen to me, the genius is in the threading, so we need to start asking a better question. Not, did he plan this from the start, but how did he stitch this new organ onto a 25-year-old skeleton without the patient dying on the table? How did he turn Joy Boy use the One Piece once, and the world government panicked, into a story where you genuinely don't know if using it again is salvation or a second catastrophe, and more importantly, who exactly is quietly arranging the body for surgery right now? How to read One Piece from now on without losing the magic. So here's what I need you to do from now on when you read One Piece. Stop speedrunning to "Oda is a 5D chess god" every Thursday. I need you to build a tiny, dorky sorting hat in your brain and start classifying things. New reveal drops, panel that makes the community collectively scream in 12 languages. Before you tweet the side-by-side, just ask, what category is this in? Does this feel like pre-writing being unveiled, a retrofit being stitched in, or a small local foreshadowing payoff? That's it. 3 boxes. You don't need a PhD. You just need to pause for 3 seconds before your inner pattern-seeking monkey starts seeing Jesus in every toast crumb on Oda's desk. And listen to me, the order matters. First, take the hit. Let the chapter slap you emotionally. Laugh with Roger at Laugh Tale. Feel the horror when a kingdom vanishes under a mother flame test. Cry about Nika dancing on a drumbeat while the world government has a panic attack. This is normal. This is fine. Stories are supposed to work on your gut before they work on your spreadsheet. Then on the reread, you can nerd out over the construction. That's when you ask, was this intentional from day one, or is this a smart retrofit? You look at something huge, like the reveal that the Nika fruit was always chasing Luffy, and you go, okay, that's pre-writing. You look at something smaller, like Kinemon's dragon gag turning into Wano trauma, and you go, that's a retrofit, but a really good one. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in fact, how most authors survive serialization without their brains melting. Here's the thing. On top of that, we need a 4th question, specific to this already used model. When we get void century crumbs, when Imu presses another giant delete button, when someone mentions tides or moons or sea levels, ask, how does this fit into the idea that we're watching a second attempt at an 800-year-old plan? If Joy Boy already reached Laugh Tale, already used the One Piece, already triggered a great cleansing, is this chapter showing us an echo of that, or a divergence from it? Pattern interrupt. What if instead of asking, how will Luffy end the story, you start asking, how is Luffy refusing to repeat the story? That one shift turns every Poneglyph, every D-carrier, every ancient weapon tease into commentary on a previous run. Being analytical doesn't mean becoming a joyless cynic who can't enjoy a punch because you're too busy grading the foreshadowing rubric. Appreciating how a retrofit is engineered, or how pre-writing constrains Oda's options, can actually deepen your awe. You stop worshipping an omniscient chess god and start appreciating an adaptive storyteller wrestling a 25-year hydra. And once you have this framework, don't leave it on One Piece. Drag it into every long series you read. Instead of punishing authors for not being omniscient, praise them for how cleverly they adapt, how honestly they course correct, how transparent they are about what was planned and what was discovered. Because in the next section, we're going to push this even harder and ask, if the One Piece was already used, what does a good second use even look like? Bringing it home. The world that was. The world that will be. So if we're going to be fair to Oda, We need to bring all of this home and actually answer the question we dangled. What does a good second use of the One Piece look like? And to do that, I need you to hold the entire argument in your head for a second, because it only really snaps into focus when you see the full silhouette. Here's the thing. The core claim isn't the treasure is friendship or it's just a big gold pile. The claim is that the One Piece is a reusable world mechanism, a system, something the ancient kingdom and Joy Boy already activated 800 years ago. It worked exactly as designed, and that success was so catastrophic it shattered the seas, erased a century, and handed power to the people most terrified of it ever happening again. Once you accept system, not statue, all the weird puzzle pieces stop being weird. Ancient weapons stop being random nukes and start reading as tools of migration and reconfiguration. Pluton as continental surgery, Poseidon as mass Fishman relocation, Uranus as sky-level control. Fishman Island's broken promise of moving to the surface stops being a cute fairy tale and becomes evidence of a previous failed attempt to finish the script Joy Boy started. The Poneglyphs. In this category, they're not quirky lore rocks. They're an intentional breadcrumb trail, a version control log left by an author who knew the world would be rebooted and the files would be wiped. Roger reaching laugh tale, reading the whole changelog and laughing himself sick before saying we were too early, is not a vibes-based reaction. It is a man realizing the mechanism requires specific world conditions. Tides, tech level, ancient weapons awake, oppressed peoples ready. Vegapunk's "The world will sink" warnings are the modern patch notes for the same system. Structurally, this is where the foreshadowing / prewriting / retrofitting framework actually matters. The promises and prophecies, Joy Boy's return, Fishman Island's migration, the dawn of the world, are foreshadowing. They're pointed at a known payoff. The big skeleton underneath. Void Century War, Ancient Kingdom, One Piece as system that's pre-writing. Oda decided those before Chapter 1 and has been revealing them out of order. And then the branding details, Nika's cartoon physics, the exact flavour of Gear 5. That's retrofit. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how you keep a 25-year draft alive without turning into narrative spaghetti. So no, Oda is not an omniscient god who secretly drew the final spread on a napkin in 1997 and has been cosplaying restraint ever since. He's something harder and honestly more impressive. An author who picked a core endgame early, a second activation of a dangerous world editing system, and then spent decades iterating around it without losing the thread. That's craft, not prophecy. And that's where Luffy lands in all of this. He's not the first guy to reach the end of the world. He's the first one whose era is actually ready to survive pushing the button. Same system, same island, same mechanism Joy Boy used, different world state. The story isn't building to discovering the One Piece. It's building to finally finishing the job. Which raises one last problem we have to stare in the face. If the last activation broke the planet, what does it mean for Luffy to use it well? Your turn. Stop saying Oda planned this from Chapter 1 and do this instead. So here's where you come in, because I'm not doing another 20-minute brain spiral on this alone. The next time you're about to tweet Oda planned this from Chapter 1, I need you to pause. I need you to take half a second and ask, which category does this actually fit? Is this foreshadowing, retrofitting, or pre-writing? Not in the abstract. I mean in your actual posts. You see a panel of Roger laughing at Laughtail, and you want to quote tweet peak foreshadowing? Stop. Ask, did the author intentionally plant this as setup for a known payoff? Is he retrofitting an older idea? Or is this a pre-written Void Century beat finally surfacing? Same image, different category, totally different claim about the writing. Because here's the thing, yelling Oda is a genius at every cool parallel doesn't help the community. It flattens the difference between a carefully planned Laboon/Brook payoff, a clever Skypiea/Hacky retrofit, and a Joy Boy endgame that's been sitting in a notebook since before Chapter 1. This is not a sin. This is not bad fandom. This is normal pattern-seeking monkey behavior. but we need to get more precise if we want our praise to actually mean anything. So, homework. Go to the comments and reclassify your favorite foreshadowing moment using this framework. Call your shot. Is Nika imagery from early chapters Prewriting finally paying off? Is Blackbeard's weird body a case where Oda left himself space and retrofitted a solution? Are the Poneglyph breadcrumbs true foreshadowing of a known void century story? Or just the tip of a pre-written iceberg we're only now seeing? Argue with each other. Be annoying. Use examples. And then I need you to use this video as a tool. The next time a discourse thread melts down into "Bro, Oda just built different with zero substance," drop this in there. Not as a dunk, but as a reference. Hey, here's a breakdown that explains the difference between foreshadowing, retrofitting, and pre-writing so we can actually talk about what was planned and how. If we can shift even 10% of those conversations from vague worship to specific analysis, the entire storytelling conversation around One Piece gets better. Because I'm not done. This framework is not just for the void century. I'm going to do full deep dives on Blackbeard using this lens. On Imu and the Great Cleansing. On specific arcs where Oda clearly changed his mind mid-serialization versus arcs that were obviously baked into the original blueprint. If you want that, subscribe, hit the thing, all the ritual phrases, you know the drill. And listen to me, I am fully aware I have spent an embarrassing amount of my adult life diagramming a cartoon pirate comic so you don't have to. This is fine. This is my cross to bear. All I ask is that you use it. The One Piece was already used 800 years ago. We're just finally catching up to the consequences. The real question is, when we get to watch it activated again, will you be able to tell which parts you saw coming and which parts were waiting for you from the very beginning?